Ean Protocol. The body of an MI6 intelligence agent believed to have died 8 years ago in Syria has been found in Budapest, but forensic experts say the death occurred just 3 days ago. The case is assigned to Europol analyst Ingrid Steiner, a specialist in dead operatives who unexpectedly returned to the game. In the course of the investigation, Ingrid encounters shadowy structures in the intelligence services, double agents, and a strange series of terrorist attacks disguised as domestic accidents in major European cities. Soon she realizes someone is launching a dormant Cold War project, and dead agents don't seem to be the only ones being brought back to life. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Summons. The sterile hum of servers was the background music to Ingrid Steiner's life. In her corner office at Europol headquarters in The Hague, bathed in the cool, impartial glow of multiple monitor screens, she was a cartographer of lost souls. Not literally, of course. Her territory was the intricate, often deliberately obfuscated, world of intelligence operatives who had vanished, gone dark, or were officially deceased, only to sometimes inexplicably resurface. Cold cases, mostly. Ghosts in the machine, or more accurately, ghosts from the machine, the vast labyrinthine databases of international espionage. Ingrid's office was a testament to her methods. Meticulously organized printouts stacked by case number, color, coded post-it notes marking cross-references, and a sprawling digital workspace where windows displaying cryptographic analysis software, historical agency manifests, and leaked correspondence overlapped in a dizzying array of information. It was tidy, yes, but it hummed with the silent energy of deep, focused work. She wasn't a field agent. Her weapons were pattern recognition, forensic linguistics, and an encyclopedic knowledge of past operations, front companies, and the aliases favored by various intelligence services. Her specialization in dead operatives had begun almost by accident, a curiosity about the sheer number of agents whose careers ended not with retirement, but with official, often unverifiable disappearance. It had evolved into a unique, if somewhat morbid niche. Right now, she was buried deep in the archives of a mid-90s operation involving a British defector in Prague. The data streams flowed, dense with encrypted communiques and financial transactions that hinted at layers of betrayal and counter-betrayal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, sifting, cross-referencing, building timelines that stretched back decades. It was painstaking, solitary work, perfectly suited to her precise, analytical mind. She thrived in the quiet space between verified fact and plausible deniability, piecing together narratives from fragments the living had left behind. The world outside her window, the gray Dutch sky, the distant murmur of the city felt impossibly far away. This room, these screens, the ghosts in the data, were her reality. A sharp, insistent chime cut through the low ambient hum, an internal system alert, not the usual general bulletin or administrative ping, but an alpha-level notification, designated for high-priority intelligence flashes. Ingrid paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. Alpha alerts were rare in her quiet corner of the Europol Labyrinth. They usually involved unfolding situations, active threats, things far removed from her historical analysis. She navigated away from the defector's ghost and clicked on the alert icon. A new window bloomed, stark white against the darker interface of her usual programs. Alert level, Alpha Case ID 2024, Alpha Budapest 1, subject, unidentified male, recently deceased. Location, Budapest Forensic Institute, Hungary. Details, body discovered. Initial forensic analysis complete. Provisional identification based on embedded biome trick markers. Alias Thorn. Service affiliation, MI6. Status, official record indicates subject designated MIA, presumed deceased, Syria, Q3 2016. Anomaly, forensic pathology report indicates estimated time of death, approximately 72 hours prior to discover why, Q2 2024. Cross-reference, subject profile matches parameters for Phoenix Protocol watchlist active. Ingrid leaned closer to the screen, her earlier work forgotten. Elias Thorn, an MI6 operative, gone missing in Syria 8 years ago. Officially dead, presumed lost to the chaos of the conflict, one of countless tragedies. She remembered the internal whispers at the time, the quiet closing of the file. But the body found in Budapest, deceased just 3 days ago? The dates clashed with impossible violence. 2016 versus 2024, Syria versus Budapest, dead versus alive. It was more than an anomaly. It was a paradox that shattered the foundations of official record. Her mind, already accustomed to navigating contradictions in historical data, immediately began constructing possible scenarios. A case of mistaken identity? Unlikely, given the mention of embedded biometric markers, standard issue for high-risk agents. A deep cover operation that involved faking his death for years? Possible, but incredibly complex, and why turn up dead, for real this time, in Budapest? And the mention of a Phoenix Protocol watch list? She hadn't encountered that specific designation in her regular work, which focused on the aftermath, not ongoing watch lists. The alert was a cold shock of reality intruding on her world of historical analysis. Elias Thorne wasn't a ghost from the past. He was a corpse from the very recent present, carrying a history that refused to stay buried. A secure line began to ring on her desk console. The internal number was Director Moreau's. Ingrid took a deep breath, mentally filing away the immediate questions the alert had spawned. This wasn't just data anymore. This was something kinetic, something that demanded attention beyond the quiet contemplation of her office. She answered on the second ring. Steiner. Ingrid, you received the Alpha alert regarding the Budapest finding? Director Moreau's voice was clipped, lacking his usual bureaucratic geniality. It conveyed urgency and a quiet tension. Yes, Director, just now, Elias Thorne. The dates, they don't reconcile. Precisely. That's why I want you in my briefing room. 10 minutes. And bring your files on Phoenix Protocol references, if you have any. Ingrid felt a jolt of professional curiosity. Moreau rarely involved her in active investigations beyond providing historical context. Understood, Director. On my way. She closed the Alpha Alert window, but its details were already seared into her memory. Elias Thorne, 2016 dead, 2024 dead. The puzzle was irresistible. Gathering her thoughts, she quickly saved her work on the Prague defector, tidied the immediate vicinity Y of her desk out of habit, and stood. The sterile hum of the servers seemed louder now, no longer just background noise, but a subtle thrum of anticipation. She walked out of her quiet corner, leaving behind the ghosts of the past for one who seemed determined to live and die again. The secure briefing room on the executive floor of Europol headquarters was designed for discretion. Soundproofed walls, no external windows, and a heavy, reinforced door marked with a digital keypad and iris scanner. Inside, it was sparse and functional. A large, polished conference table surrounded by ergonomic chairs, a state-of-the-art projection screen dominating one wall, and subtle, recessed lighting. The air was filtered and cool, carrying the faint metallic scent of ozone from the security systems. Director Moreau was already there when Ingrid arrived, standing by the main screen, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a man whose suit seemed permanently tailored to the institutional structure he inhabited. Gray, precise, unremarkable, yet conveying an undeniable air of authority. His face was a study in controlled concern. Lines around his eyes spoke of long hours and political pressures, but his gaze, when it met Ingrid's, was direct and serious. "Ingrid, thank you for coming quickly," he said, gesturing towards a chair at the table. He didn't sit himself, maintaining a posture of readiness. Ingrid took the seat indicated, placing a slim tablet containing her preliminary notes on the Thorne alert on the table. "Director, the Alpha alert mentioned the Phoenix Protocol. I have come across the term in some archived documents relating to Cold War-era intelligence projects, often linked to deep cover or sleeper operations, but details are fragmented. It's not a designation I see in current active files." Moreau nodded, his expression grim. "Those fragments might be more relevant than we thought. The Budapest discovery, it's complex, Ingrid. Elias Thorne." He paused, as if weighing each word before speaking it. "Officially lost 8 years ago. MI6 closed the file. Compensation paid to next of kin, memorial service held, the full tragic arc." He walked over to the screen and, with a few taps on a control panel, brought up a grainy official photograph of a man in his late 30s, eyes sharp, face lean, Elias Thorne. Below it, a timeline appeared, MIA DMB Syria Q3 2016. And then, Moreau continued, his voice dropping slightly, this. The Hungarian authorities found a body in an abandoned industrial building on the outskirts of Budapest. No identification initially, just some unusual subcutaneous implants. Standard biometric trackers, apparently. Europol liaison notified us because the implants registered a hit on the international database, Thorne's unique signature. He flicked the screen again. A sterile, clinical image replaced Thorne's photograph. A morgue photo, partial view. Ingrid's professional detachment kicked in. The subject appeared recently deceased. The Hungarians conducted an immediate forensic examination, Moreau said, pointing to a section of text on the screen, a summary of the preliminary pathology report. Estimated time of death, within the last 72 hours. Cause of death, awaiting final report, but initial findings suggest something acute, non-traumatic. No signs of struggle, no obvious wounds. Ingrid leaned forward, her analytical mind seizing on the discrepancy. 72 hours, but he's been officially dead for 8 years. Director, it's unprecedented in my experience. A presumed deceased operative with a demonstrably recent time of death. Unprecedented is one word for it. Impossible is another, Moreau said, turning to face her fully. Which is precisely why you are here, Ingrid. You specialize in the ghosts. You understand the layers of official record versus potential clandestine reality is. You know how to dig through the history and find the threads that might explain this. He gestured to the screen displaying Thorne's contradictory timeline. The Hungarians are treating it as a suspicious death, of course, but given the subject's background, his official status, and the profound anomaly of the timeline, this immediately lands in Europol's jurisdiction as a matter of international security and arrest. MI6 has been notified, and as you can imagine, they are reacting. Forcefully. There will be pressure, Ingrid. Political pressure, interagency pressure. Everyone will want answers, and they will want them yesterday. Moreau paced slowly in front of the screen. My initial instinct was to assign a standard homicide and major crimes team, but the Phoenix Protocol flag on his profile, which, I confess, is also new to me in an active context, combined with your specific expertise in operatives who reappear after being designated dead, it points to something beyond a simple murder. This could be tied to something far more complex, something with historical roots that might require your unique perspective. He stopped and looked directly at her. Ingrid, I am officially assigning you as the lead Europol analyst on the Elias Thorne case. You will travel to Budapest immediately, liaise with the Hungarian authorities, review the full forensic report, examine the body if necessary, and begin piecing together how a man officially dead for 8 years ends up recently deceased in Hungary. Ingrid felt a familiar surge of intellectual challenge. The sheer impossibility of the situation was a hook that sank deep. Her role had always been analytical, reactive to data provided by others. This was different. This was proactive, demanding physical presence, interaction with the messiness of the real world. But the puzzle, it was too compelling to refuse. I accept the assignment, Director, she stated, her voice steady. I'll need full access to all Europol databases, liaison privileges with Hungarian law enforcement, and access to the full MI6 file on Elias Thorne, including his operational history and the circumstances of his disappearance. Granted, Moreau confirmed. I've already alerted our liaison in Budapest, a detective inspector known simply as CS. He'll meet you at the Forensic Institute. He's pragmatic, competent. Work with him. I've also arranged for Dr. Sharma in forensics to be available for consultation here. She's one of the best for interpreting biological anomalies. Keep me updated constantly, Ingrid. This isn't just about Elias Thorne. This paradox could be the tip of something significant, something potentially destabilizing. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Be careful, Ingrid. You're leaving the safety of the data streams and stepping into the river. We don't know how deep it is or what's lurking beneath the surface. Ingrid nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. She understood. Her world was structured data. The field was fluid chaos. But the chaos held the answers the data couldn't provide on its own. When do I need to leave? She asked, already mentally calculating travel times and logistical requirements. A flight is booked for you this afternoon, Moreau replied. You should be in Budapest by early evening. CS will ensure you have access to the Institute tonight if necessary, or first thing tomorrow morning. The priority is getting eyes on the forensic evidence and understanding how that date discrepancy is physically possible. Understood, Director. Ingrid stood, gathering her tablet. The quiet of the secure room seemed to vibrate with unspoken questions. Who was Elias Thorne in the years he was presumed dead? How did he maintain that deception, if it was one? And why did he surface only to die again, this time for real, thousands of miles from where he supposedly perished? As she walked towards the door, Moreau added, "The Phoenix Protocol reference. See if you can make sense of it. It flagged him, but we don't know why. It feels connected." Her flight was booked for the afternoon, carrying her away from the clinical certainty of Europol headquarters and towards the layers of history and mystery awaiting her by the Danube. Budapest, a city built on ancient thermal springs and complex political currents, perhaps a fitting stage for a man who had seemingly risen from the grave. The familiar drone of the jet engine became the soundtrack to her reflection, pulling her further from the comforting predictability of algorithms and into a world where the dead walked, or at least had walked, before meeting their end again. But the river held only a backdrop. The true mystery lay within a refrigerated drawer, within the flesh and bone of Elias Thorne. He was not just a body. He was an impossible question made manifest. And as she flew through the clouds, Ingrid had a chilling premonition that the answers wouldn't be found in standard police reports or archived intelligence files. They would be found in the intricate, unsettling science of a corpse that defied logic, hinting at secrets far stranger and more profound than she could yet imagine. She was stepping into currents she couldn't control. Chapter 2, A Body Out of Time. The drone of the jet engine was now a distant memory, replaced by the hushed, sterile air of the Budapest Forensic Institute. Here, the impossible question of Elias Thorne awaited not as abstract data, but as tangible, chilling reality. Inspector Adam Kovacs, a man whose pragmatic air seemed ill-equipped for the mystery they faced, stood waiting by the entrance. He represented the practical, local reality of the investigation, a stark contrast to the paradox lying within the refrigerated drawer they were about to visit. Ingrid stepped through the automatic doors, the cool air a stark contrast to the slightly stale warmth of her travel clothes. She felt the subtle stiffness in her shoulders from the flight, a physical reminder that she had transitioned from the static world-D of archived data to the kinetic demands of fieldwork. Kovacs was precisely as Director Moreau had described, mid-40s, stocky build, short-cropped hair, and eyes that missed nothing while giving away little. He wore a dark, standard-issue police uniform, neat and unwrinkled. "Analyst Steiner?" Kovacs' voice was flat, professional. No hint of warmth, no overt hostility, just a polite, weary acknowledgement of protocol. "Inspector Kovacs," Ingrid replied, extending a hand. His grip was firm, brief. "Welcome to Budapest. Not the usual tourist itinerary, I assume." His tone was dry, hinting at that mild, almost imperceptible resentment towards foreign agencies sweeping in. "Unexpected, certainly," Ingrid allowed, offering a small, equally dry smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Thank you for meeting me." "My duty," he said simply, gesturing down a long, brightly lit corridor. "The facility is state-of-the-art, one of the best in Central Europe, but I doubt even our equipment has seen anything like this." "You've reviewed the initial report?" Ingrid asked as they began walking. The corridor walls were painted a clinical white, punctuated by identical anonymous doors. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something else, something sharper, colder. The scent of science meeting mortality. "The Alpha Alert, yes, and the preliminary findings from our team. Body found in a disused warehouse down by the Danube. ID suggests a man dead 8 years ago. Forensics says dead 3 days. If it wasn't for the positive biometric match, I'd say it was a case of mistaken identity. But they seem very sure." Kovacs paused outside one of the doors, keying in a code. His expression remained neutral, but the slight tightening around his eyes suggested the absurdity of the situation had in fact registered. "Standard procedure dictates we treat it as a homicide, but the details are anything but standard." "Precisely why Europol is involved," Ingrid said. "My area of expertise is irregularities in personnel status." Kovacs gave a short, humorless chuckle. "Irregularities, that's one word for coming back from the dead." He pushed the door open. "This way. The pathologist is waiting." They entered a large, sterile area, the air noticeably colder. Stainless steel gleamed under fluorescent lights. The room was quiet, efficient, focused on the grim work within its walls. They were directed towards a smaller, adjacent room, a viewing gallery separated by a large pane of glass from the main autopsy suite. This was not where the primary work was done, but where officials or family might observe, detached, shielded from the visceral reality. Inside the viewing area, a man in blue scrubs, face masked, stood near the glass. This was the forensic pathologist. Kovacs introduced him as Dr. Benedek. Dr. Benedek offered a brief nod. "Dr. Steiner," Dr. Benedek said, his voice slightly muffled by the mask. "Thank you for coming. Inspector Kovacs informed me of your unique interest in this case." "The biometric match is definitive?" Ingrid asked, cutting straight to the core of the paradox. "Absolutely," Dr. Benedek confirmed, walking closer to the glass. On the stainless steel table in the room beyond lay a body, covered partially by a sheet. Fingerprints, retinal scan, dental records, all matched Elias Thorne, file reference UK MI6, Syria 2060 MIA. No doubt whatsoever about his identity. He gestured towards the body. And the preliminary autopsy results are equally unambiguous regarding the time of death. Rigor mortis, livor mortis, algor mortis, all consistent with death occurring approximately 72 hours ago. Toxin screening is underway, but initial examination points to strangulation as the likely cause. Dr. Benedek reached down and pulled the sheet back from the shoulders and head, revealing the face of Elias Thorne. Ingrid felt a tightening in her chest, not of fear, but of intense, analytical focus mixed with a strange, unsettling awe. This wasn't a grainy photograph or a faded file entry. This was a man who, according to official history, had ceased to exist 8 years ago in a war, torn country thousands of kilometers away. Yet here he was, his face relatively unmarked, his skin tone pale but not discolored by deep decay, his features clear. His eyes were closed, his mouth set in a neutral expression. She leaned closer to the glass, her mind racing, comparing what she saw to the data she knew. "His condition," she murmured, more to herself than the others. "There's no sign of 8 years having passed, no skeletalization, no significant decomposition, nothing consistent with being dead and undiscovered for that long, let alone being recovered from a field in Syria." "That is precisely the anomaly," Kovacs said from beside her. "Our team debated it for hours." "Doctor," Benedek nodded. "Indeed. Had he been frozen, preserved in some way? We considered every possibility, but the internal organ state, the presence of recently digested food particles in the stomach, everything points to biological function ceasing within the last 3 days." He paused, looking directly at Ingrid through the glass. "There is no medical or forensic explanation for a body to maintain this state of preservation for 8 years, then suddenly die of strangulation, showing all the signs of recent death." Ingrid's gaze swept over the visible parts of the body, the texture of the skin, the short, dark hair, even the clothing visible beneath the sheet. A simple, dark t-shirt, looking clean and relatively new. "His clothing?" she asked. "Is that consistent with what he would have been wearing in Syria in 2016? Kovacs answered. "We checked the MI6 file notes. No, his last known clothing was tactical gear. This is civilian, modern civilian clothing. And any signs of past injury?" Ingrid pressed. "Scars, old wounds consistent with combat in Syria?" Dr. Benedek looked thoughtful for a moment. "There are some minor scars, yes, typical of someone who might have seen action, but nothing debilitating, nothing that suggests he was severely injured or incapacitated during his death incident." Ingrid absorbed this. An impossible identity match, an impossible time of death, civilian clothes. Minor combat scars, but nothing severe. "Was there anything else unusual found on the body, or with the body at the scene?" she asked, her mind already moving past the immediate forensic paradox to the circumstances of the discovery. Kovacs stepped forward. "The scene was clean in a way. The warehouse wasn't in use, minimal signs of forced entry. No wallet, no phone, no identification other than the body itself. Just the body, laid out on the floor. No signs of a struggle in the immediate vicinity, although the exact location of the strangulation would be difficult to determine without further analysis of neck trauma." "So, someone brought him there," Ingrid concluded. "Or he was killed there, but it wasn't a random dumping." "That's our working assumption," Kovacs confirmed. "Someone put him there." Ingrid leaned back from the glass, the image of Elias Thorne's face burned into her analytical focus. The paradox was no longer abstract data. It was a physical form lying on a table. It was unsettling, but also, in a strange way, invigorating. This wasn't just a cold case. It was a scientific and historical impossibility demanding explanation. "Thank you, doctor," she said to Benedek. "I'll need full copies of all reports, including the final toxicology and neck trauma analysis." "They will be sent to Inspector Kovacs as soon as they are finalized," Dr. Benedek confirmed. "Let's find somewhere quiet," Ingrid said to Kovacs, turning away from the viewing gallery. "I need to consult with our forensic specialist in The Hague. She's been reviewing some initial findings from your team's tests." Kovacs led her through more sterile corridors to a small, functional office equipped with a secure video conference system. It felt slightly less clinical than the rest of the institute, with a few stacked files on a desk and a map of Budapest on the wall, but the pervasive sense of antiseptic order remained. He offered her a seat, and she settled onto a plain chair, pulling out her secure tablet. Kovacs sat opposite her, watching with quiet curiosity. "Europol has its own forensic team reviewing things remotely?" he asked. "Dr. Anya Sharma," Ingrid explained as she logged in. "Brilliant, specializes in unusual biological data. She received preliminary data streams from your initial work here." Connecting to Europol's secure network took a few moments, followed by initiating an encrypted video call. The screen flickered to life, showing the face of Dr. Anya Sharma, framed by a cascade of dark, curly hair, her eyes large and bright behind slightly smudged glasses. She was in her lab, stacks of reports and complex equipment visible behind her. "Ingrid, you're on site," Anya said, her voice bright and eager. "I am. I've just seen him." The simple statement carried the weight of the impossible viewing experience. "Inspector Kovacs is with me." Kovacs nodded hello on screen. Anya offered a quick, distracted smile before turning back to her data. "Right. Let's talk science," Anya said, her enthusiasm for the data overriding any social pleasantries. She manipulated something off-screen, and the view switched to a shared screen displaying complex graphs, chemical structures, and biological readouts. "I've been looking at the full spectrum analysis from the tissue samples, blood, muscle, even some bone fragments. Standard forensic analysis confirmed the recent death parameters, just as your pathologist reported. Absolute certainty on that front. No PR reservatives, no signs of cryostasis, nothing that explains an 8-year gap using known methods." Ingrid leaned forward, her analytical engine kicking into high gear. "But," she prompted. She knew Anya wouldn't be this focused if it was just a standard confirmation. "But," Anya affirmed, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense, "there are anomalies, subtle but absolutely present and consistently detected across multiple sample types." She highlighted a section on one of the graphs, a complex series of peaks in a chemical analysis. "We're seeing traces of specific complex organic compounds, not toxins, not drugs, nothing I can match to any known biological process or environmental contaminant. They appear to be synthesized." "Synthesized?" Ingrid felt a prickle of unease. "Meaning they were introduced?" "Exactly. Not naturally occurring in the body," Anya confirmed, zooming in on another graph showing isotopic ratios. "And then there are the isotopic ratios in the tissue. Standard human tissue reflects local environment, diet, time. Thorne's ratios are off, significantly. Not just slightly, but in a way that suggests his elemental composition was influenced by a highly unusual controlled environment, possibly for an extended period. It's like his body was built or rebuilt using non-standard elemental building blocks." Kovacs made a quiet sound of disbelief beside Ingrid. "Built? It's just an analogy for the strange isotopic signature," Anya clarified quickly, though her tone suggested the analogy might be closer to the truth than they realized. "Think of it less like building from scratch, more like a tree drawing water from a source with a totally different mineral composition for years. The wood would show it. Thorne's tissues show it. And those compounds, they seem interwoven with the cellular structure itself, particularly in the neurological tissue samples I've analyzed." Neurological tissue. Ingrid's mind immediately connected the dots back to the Phoenix Protocol flag mentioned in the Alpha Alert. Operatives, potential conditioning. "Interwoven with neurological tissue," Ingrid repeated slowly, processing. What could these compounds do? Anya hesitated, her brow furrowed in concentration. Pure speculation at this stage, but given their presence in neurological tissue and their complex, non-natural structure, they could be designed to interact with neural pathways, modulate function, potentially facilitate or maintain an altered state like being dormant, unconscious, biologically suspended for 8 years. Are these markers unique? Ingrid asked. Have you ever seen anything like them? Anya shook her head, her expression serious. Never. Not in natural samples, not in any forensic database. This is new, or very, very old and highly classified. It suggests a level of biological and chemical manipulation that is far beyond standard medical or even military capabilities we publicly know about. It's precise. It's deliberate. The sterile office in Budapest suddenly felt cold in a new way. Not just the chill of mortality from the morgue, but the deep, pervasive chill of something deliberately, scientifically unnatural. The body of Elias Thorne was not just a misplaced person or a cold case come to light. He was evidence of a process that had kept him in stasis, or some form of suspended animation, for 8 years, only for him to be recently killed. So, Ingrid said, looking from the screen displaying the baffling data back to Kovacs, who was watching her intently. The body is Elias Thorne. He died 3 days ago, and he contains biological and chemical markers suggesting he was in an unnatural, manipulated state for an extended period, likely spanning the 8 years he was supposedly dead. It seems so, Anya confirmed, her voice quieter now, the scientific excitement tempered by the sheer strangeness of the findings. These markers, these compounds, they are the concrete evidence that this is not a natural phenomenon. Someone did this to him, and potentially to others. That last sentence hung in the air between them. Others. Thank you, Anya, Ingrid said, her voice steady despite the implications. Please continue analysis. Prioritize identifying the compounds and their potential function. Send me everything as you get it. Will do, Ingrid. Be careful. Anya's image flickered off the screen, replaced by the secure Europol emblem. Ingrid closed her tablet slowly, the smooth surface cool under her fingers. She looked at Kovacs. His earlier pragmatism seemed to have melted away, replaced by open astonishment and a dawning comprehension of the depth of the mystery. Anomalous markers, manipulated state, Kovacs murmured, running a hand over his jaw. So he wasn't just hiding for 8 years. He was, somewhere, done to him, and these markers prove it. The science had delivered its verdict, confirming the impossible. Elias Thorne had died 3 days ago, yet his body held the chilling truth of 8 missing years. He wasn't merely a cold case with an unusual end. He was a profound, unsettling anomaly, a man outside of time whose very state defied explanation. The Budapest warehouse was just a discarded shell. The real crime scene, the true mystery to unravel, was that impossible 8-year gap in history. Finding out how he'd existed in that void, who had kept him, and why they had finally released him from whatever state held him before letting him die now, required leaving the sterile confines of the lab behind. The investigation pivoted entirely, shifty G-focus from recent forensic impossibilities to faded intelligence files from 2016 and the hushed whispers of Budapest's hidden corners. The hunt for Elias Thorne wasn't over. It was only just beginning, digging into a shadowed past to unearth the deliberate truth lurking in the present. Chapter 3. Digging up the past. The clinical reality of the lab had laid bare the impossible, but understanding how required leaving its confines. Ingrid Steiner and Inspector Kovacs traded sterile white walls for the muted, crowded quiet of a Budapest police station archive room. Here, surrounded by the scent of aged paper and digital decay, lay the faded intelligence files from 2016, the only tangible link to Elias Thorne's disappearance 8 years ago. Unraveling that impossible gap in history began now, buried deep within the records of a mission gone wrong. The room was less an archive and more a controlled chaos. Stacks of physical boxes on industrial shelving competing with whirring hard drives connected to dusty monitors on cramped desks. A single battered metal desk had been cleared for them, 2 chairs pulled up, one slightly rickety. Kovacs gestured towards a large boxy monitor displaying rows of file names alongside a modest pile of physical folders tied with faded ribbon. Most of it's digitized now, thank God. Kovacs said, pulling up the main directory for the Thorne, Elias, MI6 liaison file. But some of the source reports, the initial chaotic ones, they only exist on paper, probably deemed too unreliable for official digital archiving, conveniently forgotten. Ingrid nodded, pulling her chair closer. She preferred digital for searchability and cross-referencing, but physical files often contained marginalia, coffee stains, or subtle signs of handling that spoke volumes the sanitized digital copies missed. Let's start with the official report summary, then dive into the raw intelligence logs and source debriefs. For the next hour, the two worked in tandem, reading, scrolling, and making notes. The official summary painted a clear, if grim, picture. A small, joint MI6 local intelligence operation in a contested area near Aleppo, Syria, targeting a minor arms dealer. Thorne was part of the observation team. Communication was lost abruptly. A subsequent, risky retrieval reconnaissance mission found evidence of an ambush, a destroyed vehicle, signs of a firefight, bodies, and, crucially, local intelligence sources later confirmed Thorne's death, supposedly identified from partial remains or personal effects recovered from the chaotic scene. The official line was, "Killed in action, body unrecoverable." "Standard protocol for a mission gone bad," Kovacs commented, leaning back. "Secure the area if possible, recover what you can, declare the rest KIA-MIA based on the best available info." In that theater, at that time, chaos was the norm. Details got fuzz, why fast? Ingrid wasn't interested in the official narrative. She was looking for the fuzz. Let's look at the source reports, the ones that confirmed his death. Kovacs pulled up the relevant digital files while Ingrid opened the physical folders. The reports were a mess of hastily typed notes, translated intercepts, and handwritten summaries of debriefings with various local contacts, informants, allied fighters, even civilians caught in the area. Ingrid's brow furrowed almost immediately. Source A they saw bodies near the vehicle wreck, couldn't approach. Source B, days later, reports finding evidence of foreign operatives among the casualties. Source C, weeks later, provides details supposedly confirming Thorne's identity, but their description of his build or equipment doesn't quite match MI6's profile data here. She pointed to a discrepancy in weapon type mentioned. Could be simple errors, Kovacs suggested. Confusion in the heat of the moment or translation issues. Possibly, Ingrid conceded, but her tone was sharp. But then there's the timeline. Source B's report is dated 2 days after the incident. Source C's is nearly 3 weeks. Why the delay? And why didn't the initial retrieval team find this evidence or confirm the identity? She shuffled through the physical papers, finding original debriefing notes. Look here, Source C's debrief. The operative conducting the debrief seems overly eager to accept the confirmation, asks leading questions, doesn't probe inconsistencies in the description. Kovacs leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. You're right. Almost like they wanted confirmation, not necessarily proof. Ingrid dug deeper. And the communication logs. There's a 10-minute gap in radio logs just before contact was lost. A blank spot. Equipment malfunction is noted, but no details, no follow-up report on the malfunction itself. Highly unusual for an active mission. She pointed to another section. Eyewitness accounts from the initial chaotic phase are also inconsistent. One source mentions sounds of 2 distinct firefights, not one. Another mentions seeing a non-military vehicle leaving the area after the presumed ambush time. These weren't in the summary report. Buried in the noise, perhaps, Kovacs mused, or deliberately omitted to create a cleaner narrative. Less ambiguity makes for easier reports up the chain. Ingrid shook her head slowly. These aren't minor discrepancies, Adam. These are red flags. Conflicting eyewitness accounts, a curious gap in communication, potentially compromised or leading source debriefings, unverified secondary reports being used for official confirmation weeks after the event. If this was a cold case file, I'd flag it immediately for requiring reevaluation based on the source data alone. The official report reads like a conclusion that was reached, not one that was derived purely from the evidence. Kovacs leaned back again, looking at the monitor displaying Thorne's name. So you think the ambush wasn't what it seemed? Or that Thorne wasn't killed there? I think the evidence base for his death is incredibly weak, perhaps deliberately so, Ingrid stated. It allowed for a convenient official narrative. MI6 agent lost in a chaotic foreign theater. End of story. No further questions asked. But if he wasn't killed, where did he go? And who orchestrated the messy, inconsistent reports that made it look like he was? The implications of the biological anomalies found in Thorne's body the previous day now fused with the inconsistencies in the historical record. He hadn't just survived, he had been taken. And the groundwork for covering his disappearance seemed to have been laid 8 years ago. They spent another hour correlating every scrap of information, cross-referencing names of local contacts and intelligence officers involved in the 2016 reports with any later activity. Nothing immediately jumped out, but the pattern of inconsistencies solidified Ingrid's conviction. Elias Thorne's disappearance wasn't an accident of war. It was a carefully managed extraction, disguised as a casualty. "Okay," Ingrid said, closing a physical folder with a decisive thud. "The official story is a facade. Thorne was taken. The question is by whom, and why hide it so thoroughly, and why bring him back, only for him to die now?" Kovacs nodded, rubbing his chin. "We need to shift from the historical record to the present. Who in Budapest might know something about clandestine activities, especially those involving foreigners, old networks, or people who disappear and reappear? Official channels will be slow and likely blind to this kind of operation." "Your local contacts?" Ingrid prompted. "Exactly," Kovacs confirmed. "There are corners of this city that remember the old days, where information flows through different channels. It's not always reliable, and it's rarely clean, but if someone like Thorne was held here or moved through here recently, someone might have seen or heard something." He made a call, speaking quickly in Hungarian. Ingrid listened, catching fragmented words: foreigner, old business, sensitive. He hung up, a thoughtful look on his face. "My contact, Laszlo, runs a small, shall we say, information brokerage out of a bar down in District Vate. Deals with all sorts: smugglers, former intelligence types, people who saw too much but kept quiet. He's cautious, trusts few people, especially police. But he owes me a favor. He'll meet us late afternoon. Probably won't give us much, but it's a start." The bar Laszlo ran was tucked away on a side street, marked only by a peeling sign depicting a faded beer mug. Inside, it was dimly lit, smelling of stale smoke, cheap palinka, and desperation. A handful of grizzled patrons occupied scattered tables, their conversations hushed. The air felt heavy, watchful. Kovacs led Ingrid to a booth in the back corner. Laszlo emerged from behind the bar, a small, wiry man with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore a stained apron over a worn sweater. He didn't smile. "Adam," Laszlo acknowledged with a nod. His voice was gravelly. "You bring a colleague, not from around here." His eyes lingered on Ingrid, assessing her with a wary intensity that went beyond mere curiosity. He recognized the look of someone outside the local ecosystem. "This is Ingrid," Kovacs introduced. "She's here about an old ghost, someone who should be dead but wasn't, and now is." Laszlo's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, recognition, concern, crossed his eyes. He wiped down the table in front of them slowly. "Ghosts, they usually stay buried for a reason. Digging them up makes noise." "We're trying to understand the noise," Ingrid said, her voice quiet but direct. She leaned forward slightly. "We're looking for whispers, about anyone unusual in the last few days, weeks. Foreigners not acting like tourists, old faces reappearing. Talk of dormant projects, perhaps, things that belong to another time." Laszlo poured 3 small glasses of palinka, sliding 2 across the table without asking. He took a slow sip of his own, his gaze distant. "Budapest is full of old ghosts, Adam, full of old projects. They never really die, just sleep. Sometimes you hear rustling in the walls, like something is waking up." He paused, considering them. "In the last, maybe 2 weeks, there's been a feeling, like currents shifting, some people asking questions they haven't asked in years, people from the old days, not Hungarians." "Anyone specific?" Ingrid pressed. "Someone matching the description of a middle-aged European man, not Hungarian, recently deceased." Laszlo finally met Ingrid's eyes directly. They were unnervingly steady. "Dead man, you say?" "No, dead men stay dead. But there was talk, vague talk, about a delivery, something valuable coming through, needed, careful handling, used old routes, tunnels, forgotten places." Tunnels, forgotten places. The Budapest underworld, disused Soviet-era tunnels, forgotten warehouses, old bathhouses, the very locations mentioned in the world, building as clandestine meeting spots. Kovacs exchanged a look with Ingrid. A delivery? Kovacs asked. Of what? Laszlo shrugged, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. Information is hard to come by on this, only whispers, and the whispers, they mention a name, an old name, connected to certain services, a name people thought was gone. He hesitated, then Lowe aired his voice further. They say, the Phoenix is flying again. Ingrid felt a jolt. Phoenix Protocol. The flag on Thorne's file. The name Laszlo mentioned wasn't Elias Thorne's, she was certain, but something else. Something more significant. A project name? A code name for an individual or group? Phoenix, Ingrid repeated softly, letting the word hang in the air. What does that name mean to you, Laszlo? Who or what is the Phoenix? Laszlo finished his palinka in a single gulp, wincing slightly. Trouble, he stated flatly. It means trouble. The kind that buried itself deep a long time ago. The kind that wakes up hungry. And when it does... He trailed off, looking towards the dark corner of the bar, as if seeing something unpleasant there. Be careful, Adam. Your ghost, he might just be the first feather. He stood abruptly. That's all I have. Don't come back about this. The less I know, the longer I live. Without another word, he disappeared back behind the bar. Ingrid and Kovacs sat in silence for a moment, the bitter taste of palinka on their tongues. The cryptic information from Laszlo, combined with the file inconsistencies, painted a disturbing picture. Thorne wasn't just taken. He was part of a delivery, linked to something called Phoenix that was flying again using old routes. This wasn't a rogue kidnapping. It sounded like a deliberate, organized reactivation of a dormant, dangerous entity or operation. Phoenix, Kovacs murmured. Never heard that term in relation to local organized crime. Sounds different. It ties into the flag on Thorne's MI6 file, Ingrid confirmed, her mind racing. Phoenix Protocol. It wasn't just a watchlist tag. It's the name of the operation that took him, that kept him for 8 years. They left the bar, stepping back out into the late afternoon light of Budapest. The city felt less like a beautiful historical capital and more like a labyrinth with hidden passages and buried secrets. Their final stop of the day was the police evidence lockup, a cage-like room smelling faintly of disinfectant and mothballs. Thorne's recovered possessions were laid out on a steel table. The clothes he was found in, generic, dark, practical, a worn leth or wallet containing no identification or money, a cheap, burner-style mobile phone with a dead battery and a few miscellaneous items, a crumpled tissue, a smooth gray stone, a plastic comb. Ingrid methodically examined each item. The clothes were mass-produced, untraceable. The wallet was clean, no hidden compartments. The phone was old, likely wiped, but she'd have Anya Sharma check it anyway. The stone was just a stone, smooth from being carried, unremarkable. The comb was plastic, nothing. Then she picked up a small, tarnished brass keyring. It held only one key, a standard, modern house key. Not unusual in itself, but attached to the ring, threaded onto the metal, was a tiny, almost decorative object. It looked like a miniature, stylized beard, crudely cast in the same tarnished brass. A phoenix, or just a bird? Ingrid turned it over in her fingers. It felt heavy for its size. On its underside, almost invisible against the patina, she saw faint markings. Not decorative filigree, but deliberately etched lines. A sequence of dots and dashes, or something else. She pulled out a small, high-powered flashlight from her bag and shone it on the tiny object. The markings were clearer now, not Morse code. They looked like fragmented letters and numbers, interspersed with what could be symbols. A partial sequence. Kovacs leaned in. What is it? Some kind of lucky charm? Maybe, Ingrid said, but her mind was already connecting dots. A delivery, an old name, Phoenix, and now a symbol of a bird, perhaps a phoenix, attached to a key, with a partial sequence etched onto it. It didn't fit the profile of a dead Inherver operative found with no personal effects. It felt deliberate, a breadcrumb, or a key to something else. This, Ingrid stated, holding up the keyring, her analytical gaze fixed on the tiny brass bird, wasn't found by chance. It feels placed. It's not standard issue, not something a disposable asset would typically keep. And these markings... She felt a surge of certainty, a familiar click in her mind as the scattered pieces began to align. The impossible timeline, the biological anomalies, the inconsistencies in the historical record, the whispers in the underworld, and this small, peculiar object. Elias Thorne was not just a ghost returned. He was part of a system, a network, reactivating after years of dormancy, and this small cryptic clue was likely the first tangible link to whoever was pulling the strings of this Phoenix operation. "These markings," Ingrid murmured, feeling the weight of the tiny brass bird in her hand. "I think they're a code, or part of one, and they're not telling us where Thorn has been. They're telling us where he was going, or what he was meant to do, now." Ingrid closed the file on Elias Thorn, but the chill wasn't from the damp air of the evidence room. The patterns she'd unearthed, the cryptic clues and unnerving synchronicity, pointed not to a ghost resurrected, but to a force already awake and active. Phoenix's wasn't merely digging up the past, it was constructing a future, piece by devastating piece, with terrifying precision. The unstable ground wasn't just beneath Budapest, it was everywhere. This wasn't just about a dead agent and a failed mission years ago. This was current, global, and unfolding in plain sight, hidden within the noise of everyday tragedy. Ingrid knew her focus couldn't stay fixed on Thorn's frozen timeline. She had to widen her gaze, because somewhere out there, the next domino was already falling, designed to look like a simple, unavoidable accident. Chapter 3. The First Accident. The chilling realization from the evidence lockup hadn't dissipated. Instead, it sharpened Ingrid's focus. Back in the temporary office at the Budapest station with Kovacs reviewing local files, she scanned the stream of Europol incident reports scrolling across her monitor, searching for the ripple she knew was coming. A headline from Vienna, "Building collapse, gas leak suspected," flashed, seemingly a routine tragedy. But as she read the initial details, a flicker of recognition, unsettling and precise pricked at her, like a hidden signature in the noise of everyday disaster. The office was functional, impersonal. 2 desks, borrowed monitors humming softly, the air smelling faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Outside, Budapest traffic hummed, a distant counterpoint to the silent, digital hunt Ingrid was engaged in. Kovacs sat across from her, his large frame hunched over paper files detailing the warehouse discovery, muttering occasionally about jurisdictional technicalities. His grounded approach was a useful anchor, but right now Ingrid was floating in the ether of data, searching for the pattern. The Vienna report was flagged amber, standard for a significant urban incident with casualties. Initial reports cited eyewitness accounts of a loud bang, followed swiftly by structural failure in a turn-of-the-century apartment building in the Leopoldstadt DT district. Fire services reported minimal signs of sustained fire, unusual for a major gas explosion, but significant structural damage and debris field consistent with a rapid internal detonation or catastrophic failure. Several fatalities and injuries confirmed. The local utility company had reported pressure fluctuations in the gas line just prior to the event, reinforcing the initial gas leak hypothesis. It was a tragedy, the kind that happened. Except, Ingrid zoomed in on the technical descriptions buried deep in the preliminary assessment forwarded by the Austrian authorities. Structural integrity compromised simultaneously at multiple load-bearing points. Absence of thermal charring consistent with prolonged combustion. Debris analysis pending. Preliminary visual suggests unusual pulverization of concrete and brick nearest the apparent blast origin. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Unusual pulverization. Simultaneous failure. It wasn't the description of a messy, explosive gas ignition. Gas explosions were chaotic, outward blasting events, often followed by significant fires. This sounded precise, controlled. A memory surfaced, not of the chaotic, violent scene Thorn was supposedly killed in Syria, but of the sterile, controlled environment Dr. Sharma had hypothesized based on the isotopic ratios in Thorn's body. A place where fundamental physical and biological parameters could be precisely manipulated, and the anomalies themselves, complex synthesized compounds potentially capable of influencing neural function. But could they also perhaps influence matter? Anything? Kovacs asked, looking up from his files, sensing the shift in her posture. Ingrid didn't immediately answer, her eyes fixed on the screen. Vienna, building collapse, reported gas leak. Kovacs shrugged. Happens. Old infrastructure. Maybe, Ingrid conceded, but her voice was tight. Or maybe not. She pulled up the satellite imagery time-stamped just after the event. The damage was contained, almost surgical, for a supposedly catastrophic failure. The building was a ruin, Yes, but the surrounding structures were relatively intact, dusted with debris, but not themselves crumbling. They're saying it was a mainline rupture, Kovacs added. A mainline rupture that caused synchronous structural failure with minimal fire and unusual pulverization? Ingrid murmured, thinking aloud. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. The cryptic clue on Thorne's keyring, the phoenix, the etched markings, felt less like a historical marker and more like a herald. A reawakening. Thorne's body was the first sign, a dead man walking or delivered. Were these accidents the next? The biological anomalies in Thorne suggested a capability far beyond simple abduction and holding. If they could manipulate a human body at a biological and perhaps neurological level for 8 years, what else could they manipulate? Matter. Energy. Kovacs, she said, turning to him, her expression serious. Do you know anyone reliable in Vienna police or forensics? Someone outside the immediate incident team? He frowned, picking up on her tone. Maybe. A few contacts from joint training exercises. Why? I need access to the raw data from that Vienna site, Ingrid said. Sensor logs, structural assessments, preliminary forensic samples, everything. You think it's connected to Thorne? He asked, his skepticism battling with the strange reality of their current case. I don't think. I have a bad feeling, Ingrid corrected. The timing, the unnatural precision of the failure, and the phoenix resurfacing, it feels too coincidental. It feels like a test of capabilities, or a demonstration. Kovacs studied her face, seeing the analytical certainty beneath the outward signs of unease. He sighed, closing his file. All right, I'll make some calls, discreetly. Getting the data proved easier than Ingrid had anticipated, thanks to Kovacs' surprisingly well-placed, slightly off-the-books contact in Vienna's technical police unit. The official investigation was proceeding along the lines of a tragic infrastructure failure, but enough raw sensor logs, atmospheric readings, and even utility network data had been collected before the site was fully secured to pique Ingrid's interest and, more importantly, provide fodder for Dr. Anya Sharma. Ingrid initiated a secure video conference from the Budapest office's small, soundproofed meeting room. The screen flickered to life, showing Anya's bright, intense face, framed by unruly curls, in her clinically white lab at Europol HQ. Beside her, looking considerably less comfortable squeezed into the corner of the frame, was Director Moreau, his expression a mixture of weary patience and cautious curiosity. Ingrid, Moreau began, his voice gravely over the secure line. Inspector Kovacs mentioned you had a theory regarding the Vienna incident. A suspicion, Director, Ingrid corrected, nodding to him, then to Anya. One I believe Dr. Sharma's expertise can help confirm or deny. She turned to Anya. Anya, I've sent you the data package from Vienna. Initial reports point to a gas leak and structural collapse, but the technical details are anomalous. Synchronous failure points, unusual pulverization, lack of extensive fire damage. Anya was already typing, her eyes scanning the data streams Ingrid had sent. Received, Ingrid. Running initial spectral and temporal analyses now. Her fingers danced across her keyboard, pulling up graphs, sensor readouts, utility network logs. Ingrid continued, addressing both of them. Based on the biological anomalies you found in Elias Thorne, Anya, the synthesized compounds, the unusual isotopic ratios, the potential for manipulating biological state, I began to wonder if a similar level of advanced, controlled manipulation could be applied externally, to structures, as a form of disguised attack. Moreau shifted, his skepticism visible even through the pixelated image. Disguised attack, Steiner? A building collapse is hardly subtle. It's a disaster. But it's a natural disaster, Ingrid countered. Or appears to be. Blame the utility company. Blame old infrastructure. It's tragic, but it fits a familiar narrative. Unlike a bomb or a directed energy weapon signature, which would immediately scream "at-ack." Anya stopped typing, her brow furrowed in concentration. Okay, this is interesting. Ingrid, you were right about the timing data. The utility logs show a pressure anomaly in the gas line, consistent with a leak starting. But the structural failure, according to the seismic and acoustic sensor data, occurred within microseconds across multiple points before any thermal event consistent with gas ignition could have propagated. She brought up a complex waveform on her screen. Look at this. This is a composite energy signature detected by multiple sensors in the immediate vicinity, starting approximately zero point 0.3 seconds before the primary acoustic signature of the collapse. It's a brief, high-intensity pulse, not thermal, not a conventional explosive shockwave. The spectral analysis, it's showing energy frequencies I don't have a match for in any standard database of explosive profiles or environmental events. It looks artificial. Designed. Moreau leaned closer to the screen. Artificial? Designed? Yes, Director, Anya confirmed, her voice gaining speed, the thrill of discovery overriding her usual calm. And there's more. Trace atmospheric analysis picked up residual particulate matter. Standard analysis flagged it as construction dust and combustion byproducts, consistent with the event. But running it through a more sensitive spectral analysis, specifically tuned for the kind of complex organic signatures we found in Thorn. She paused, bringing up another graph. There are trace elements here. Not volatile or widespread, but clustered near the origin point of that energy pulse. Complex synthesized organic compounds. Not identical to the ones in Thorn's tissues, but structurally similar, based on the same foundational, non-natural chemistry. Silence hung heavy on the line for a moment, broken only by the faint hum of equipment from Anya's lab. Ingrid felt a cold certainty settle in her gut. Thorn wasn't just a body from the past. He was a link to a present capability. A capability that could keep a man in suspended animation for years. And now, seemingly, could cause buildings to crumble into dust, disguised as mundane tragedy. So, Moreau said slowly, his voice lacking its earlier skepticism, replaced by a heavy weight. These compounds, these energy signatures, you're saying they are linked to what was found in Thorn? The underlying chemistry and the unnatural nature of the energy pulse are highly suggestive of a common origin, Director, Anya stated. This isn't a gas leak, it's a deliberate structural collapse triggered by an unknown, advanced energy source, leaving unique trace signatures. And those signatures bear a striking resemblance to the biological anomalies present in Elias Thorn. Ingrid pressed her point. Elias Thorn, flagged under Phoenix Protocol, disappears for 8 years, reappears with biological markers of extreme, non-natural manipulation, and is found dead just days ago. Now, we have what looks like an orchestrated accident in Vienna, just days after Thorn's body is discovered, bearing technical signatures that echo the anomalies in Thorn's body. This isn't coincidence. This is connected. Moreau was silent for a long moment, processing. The political implications of Ingrid's theory were immense. Suggesting a foreign or clandestine entity was orchestrating accidents in European capitals, killing civilians and disguising it as infrastructure failure. It bordered on conspiracy theory, the kind that destabilized governments and shattered international trust. The data is compelling, Dr. Sharma, Moreau finally said, his voice firm but wary. The anomalies are clear. However, linking trace residues in an unidentified energy pulse directly to a specific individual found dead in another country, let alone a wide-R Phoenix Protocol, and orchestrated attacks across Europe, that is a massive leap, Steiner. It's a pattern, Director, Ingrid insisted. Thorn is the thread. The anomalies are the signature. The Vienna incident is the first confirmed use of that signature in the field, disguised as an accident. A single data point, Steiner, Moreau countered, rubbing his temples again. Anomalous, yes. Concerning, absolutely. But not definitive proof of a continent-wide conspiracy disguised as faulty infrastructure. What level of proof do you require, Director? Ingrid asked, knowing the answer would be frustratingly high. Something concrete, Moreau stated. Something that links the Vienna incident definitively to Thorn's recent activities or to a specific group or capability we can identify and verify. A weapon fragment, a clear operational signature, not just trace residues and sensor anomalies, however unique they are. This cannot go public, not yet. Not based on this. The political fallout would be catastrophic if we're wrong. He looked directly at Ingrid through the screen. You have authorization to continue investigating the technical anomalies found in Vienna and their possible correlation with the biological anomalies in Thorn. Dr. Sharma will continue to provide you with full support on the technical analysis. But this remains, officially, an investigation into Elias Thorn's death and the Vienna building collapse as two separate incidents, albeit with intriguing technical overlaps. You are not authorized to brief other agencies or government bodies on a theory of orchestrated attacks disguised as accidents based on this evidence alone. Is that clear, Steiner? Ingrid understood the institutional wall she was facing. Moreau wasn't dismissing her. The look on his face, the gravity of his tone, showed he recognized the potential horror of her theory. But he was bound by procedure, by the need for irrefutable evidence C before triggering an international panic and political firestorm. He needed a smoking gun. Clear, Director, Ingrid said, though her jaw was tight with frustration. The pattern was screaming at her, but the official channels were only willing to acknowledge whispers. The call ended, leaving Ingrid and Anya on the screen. He's being cautious, Anya said, sensing Ingrid's frustration. The data is compelling to us, Ingrid, because we understand the science. But to the wider world, to politicians, unidentified energy pulse and trace synthesized compounds sounds like science fiction, not proof of an attack. I know, Ingrid sighed, but the link is there, Anya. Thorn, the anomalies, Vienna. It's not random. I agree, Anya said. I'll keep digging into the Vienna data, see if I can reverse engineer anything from the spectral analysis, maybe narrow down the potential source or technology used for that pulse. And I'll revisit Thorn's tissue samples, look for anigh correlating markers that might suggest exposure to similar external forces. Thank you, Anya, Ingrid said. She looked at the screen, seeing the abstract graphs and data points that represented death and destruction. A dead man brought back to life, then found dead again. And now, seemingly innocent tragedies that weren't innocent at all. The Phoenix wasn't just the name of an old protocol. It was active, and it was showing them, piece by terrifying piece, what it was capable of. If Vienna was the first accident, where would the next one be? And how many more seemingly unrelated incidents across Europe were actually part of this hidden, deadly pattern? She needed to find more pieces of the puzzle, faster than the Phoenix could scatter them. If official channels were constrained, she would have to look elsewhere. Perhaps the historical archives held more than just inconsistencies about Thorn's disappearance. Perhaps they held the key to understanding the enemy she was now hunting, the first accident. The chilling realization from the evidence lockup hadn't dissipated. Instead, it sharpened Ingrid's focus. Back in the temporary office at the Budapest station, with Kovacs reviewing local files, she scanned the stream of Europol incident reports scrolling across her monitor, searching for the ripple she knew was coming. A headline from Vienna, "Building collapse, gas leak suspected," flashed, seemingly a routine tragedy. But as she read the initial details, a flicker of recognition, unsettling and precise pricked at her, like a hidden signature in the noise of everyday disaster. The temporary workspace was sparse, functional. 2 metal desks, borrowed monitors casting a pallid glow, the air thick with the scent of recycled paper and stale coffee from a thermos. Kovacs had brought, outside, the distant murmur of Budapest traffic formed a low, constant hum, a world away from the silent, digital hunt Ingrid was engaged in. Kovacs, across from her, was immersed in local reports detailing the discovery of Thorn's body, the warehouse specifics, witness statements from neighbors who saw nothing, the tedious inventory of the few personal effects. He occasionally grunted, highlighting a passage or making a note, his focus firmly on the ground-level reality of the investigation. Ingrid, however, was scanning the horizon, looking for echoes. The Vienna report was flagged amber, a standard marker for significant urban incidents involving potential loss of life or major damage. The initial reports were boilerplate: local emergency services dispatched, area secured, preliminary assessment. It concerned an apartment building in Leopoldstadt, a district Ingrid knew from brief past assignments. Stately, old architecture, narrow streets. Eyewitness accounts cited a sudden, violent event, a bang, then the sickening sound of tearing metal and crumbling stone. The official hypothesis, widely reported, was a catastrophic gas leak explosion. Casualties were confirmed, their numbers still being tallied. Ingrid scrolled down, past the human tragedy, looking for the cold, technical language of the first responders and structural engineers. Preliminary assessments noted near total structural failure, rapid, inward collapse, and minimal evidence of sustained post-collapse fire typical of widespread gas ignition. There was also a note about unusual localized material fragmentation observed by first responders near the supposed origin point. Inward collapse, minimal fire, unusual fragmentation. These phrases snagged in Ingrid's mind, dissonant details in the otherwise predictable narrative of a gas explosion. Gas blasts were expansive, outward forces that typically blew walls out and were off the end followed by raging fires fueled by the escaping gas. This sounded different. It sounded contained, controlled. She thought back to Dr. Sharma's description of the environment Thorn had likely been kept in, sterile, controlled, where even isotopic ratios could be altered, and the biological anomalies themselves, complex synthesized organic compounds, potentially used to manipulate neural function to maintain an altered state. What if that capability wasn't limited to biology? What if it extended to physics, to matter? Anything useful in those reports, Ingrid? Kovacs asked, looking up, his gaze sharp. He'd learned quickly to read the subtle shifts in her posture, the sudden stillness that meant her analytical mind had locked onto something others missed. Vienna, building collapse, Ingrid said, stating the obvious, but her voice held a tight restraint. Officially a gas leak. Kovacs leaned back, sighing. Terrible business, old city, old pipes, bound to happen. Maybe, Ingrid conceded, pulling up a schematic of the building, cross-referenced with initial damage reports. But the description of the collapse, it doesn't quite fit the profile of a typical gas explosion, more like the building was imploded or stressed to failure in a very specific way. She zoomed in on a structural engineer's note. Failure points appear to have been compromised near simultaneously across multiple load-bearing elements, suggesting a coordinated stress event rather than a single point of explosive origin. A coordinated stress event. The words echoed the precision of Anya's description of the biological manipulation found in Thorn, the complex organic compounds, the potential for advanced modulation. If you could modulate a human body like that, could you modulate the structural integrity of a building? Kovacs, she said, turning to him, her expression intent. Do you still have that contact in Vienna police you mentioned? The one in the technical unit? He raised an eyebrow, surprised by the abrupt shift in focus. Major Schmidt? Yes, we trained together years ago. Solid enough. Why? You're not suggesting this is connected to Thorn? The Phoenix Protocol flag, Ingrid said, leaning forward. The biological anomalies. Thorn's impossible timeline. Now a natural disaster in another capital, days after his body surfaces, with technical characteristics that sound anything but natural. It feels like a pattern emerging, Kovacs. A signature. She thought of the small brass phoenix on Thorn's keyring, the faint, almost invisible etchings. A calling card? A coordinate? I need access to the raw data from that Vienna site, she pressed. Sensor logs, seismic, acoustic, atmospheric. Utility records for the area, down to the second. Any preliminary forensic findings on material residue, even if they thought it was just dust tea or combustion byproducts. Kovacs studied her, the practical policeman confronting the analyst's abstract, alarming leaps. But the Thorn case was already so far beyond practical. A man dead 8 years, found dead now, filled with impossible chemistry. He picked up his phone. All right, Steiner. I'll call Schmidt, see what strings I can pull. But don't expect miracles. Official investigations are official. Getting the data package from Vienna took a few hours and several layers of interagency wrangling, smoothed considerably by Major Schmidt navigating the internal bureaucracy and labeling the request as Europol assistance on technical analysis of structural failure modes. It arrived in a secure Europol channel, a hefty file of raw sensor data, time-stamped feeds, initial photographic surveys, and preliminary environmental readings. Ingrid immediately set up a secure video conference. On the screen, Dr. Anya Sharma was already waiting in her spotless lab, looking focused and ready. A moment later, Director Moreau's face appeared, superimposed over Anya's data-rich background, his expression stern. Director, Dr. Sharma, Ingrid greeted them, dispensing with preamble. Thank you for taking this call. I believe the data package I sent from Vienna requires immediate attention. Moreau nodded, his gaze sharp. Inspector Kovacs' contact forwarded your request. You believe there's something beyond a simple gas explosion, Steiner? I do, Director, Ingrid confirmed. And I believe Dr. Sharma's analysis of the raw sensor data will support that. She turned to Anya. Anya, I've flagged specific data streams, seismic, acoustic, and atmospheric sensor logs from the immediate vicinity of the building, as well as the detailed utility pressure graphs. Anya was already multitasking, manipulating the data streams on her monitors, her fingers flying across a specialized analysis program. Ingrid, I'm seeing it. The utility data confirms a sudden pressure drop consistent with a major line rupture around the time of the event. But the timing, look at this. She brought up a synchronized timeline display. The seismic and acoustic sensors registered significant to high-intensity energy pulses approximately 0.3 seconds before the first detectable signs of structural stress or explosion unique to gas ignition. She isolated the energy pulse signature. This isn't thermal energy, Director, and it's not the characteristic shock wave of a conventional high explosive. It's a very specific, non-standard waveform. Multiple sensors picked it up, localized to the building's footprint. The spectral analysis. It's unlike anything in our database of known environmental phenomena or explosive devices. Anya's voice was steady, factual, lending immense weight to her extraordinary claims. It appears to be a highly controlled, directed energy release, artificial. Moreau's eyes narrowed. Directed energy? In the middle of Vienna? Precisely, Director, Ingrid interjected, designed to look like something else. Anya continued, pulling up another data set, the environmental residue analysis, and the trace atmospheric particulate data. Initial field tests identified standard building materials and combustion byproducts, but performing a targeted spectral analysis filtering for complex organic compounds, it picked up something. Trace residues clustered around the building's core, consistent with the apparent origin point of that energy pulse. Compounds that don't match anything in natural biology or conventional industrial chemistry. She paused, then delivered the critical link. Cross-referencing the spectral signatures of these trace residues with the biological anomalies found in Elias Thorne. There's a significant correlation, Director. The underlying chemical structure is highly similar. They appear to belong to the same synthesized family of compounds that were present in Thorne's tissues after 8 years in whatever state he was held in. Silence descended on the secure channel, thick with the unspoken implications. Ingrid pressed her point, her voice low and urgent. Elias Thorne, missing 8 years after a potentially faked death, reappears with impossible biological markers linked to a program called Phoenix Protocol. Days later, a building in Vienna is destroyed by what appears to be a deliberate, highly controlled energy pulse, leaving behind trace chemical signatures that echo the anomalies found in Thorne's body. This isn't just a strange coincidence, Director. This is the signature of the Phoenix Protocol in action, active, and disguised as an accident. Moreau leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He was a pragmatist, a man of evidence and procedure. But the evidence Anya presented, validated by Ingrid's chilling deduction, was difficult to dismiss, however fantastic the conclusion. The technical findings are compelling, Dr. Sharma, Moreau finally said, his voice measured, cautious. Highly irregular, and the correlation with Thorne's biological markers is noted. He looked directly at Ingrid. However, Steiner, correlation is no proof of causation. An anomalous energy pulse and trace exotic compounds in one location linked spectrally to biological anomalies in a body found days earlier in another location. It suggests a connection, yes, but it is not definitive, irrefutable evidence of a coordinated, orchestrated attack disguised as a gas leak. Not the kind that would stand up to public scrutiny or justify triggering a continent-wide alert about rogue actors using advanced, untraceable weapons. Director, Ingrid argued, the pattern is clear. This isn't isolated. Thorne wasn't just found, he was delivered. And now this. These are deliberate acts, designed to evade detection by looking like accidents. Vienna is just the first one we've spotted because we were already looking for anomalies. Speculation, Steiner. Moreau countered, though his rigidity had softened slightly, replaced by a deep concern in his eyes. Highly informed speculation, based on excellent technical work, but speculation nonetheless. Think of the political ramifications. Accusing a potentially foreign entity or a rogue element of launching untraceable attacks disguised as domestic tragedies in major European cities? Without absolute proof, it would cause chaos. We'd face international pressure, accusations of fearmonger jeopardizing actual investigations. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You have authorization to continue your investigation into Elias Thorne's death and the Phoenix Protocol. Dr. Sharma will continue to analyze the Vienna data and cross-reference it with Thorne's biological profile, pursue the technical anomalies and their potential link. But, officially, publicly, and in communication with other national agencies, the Vienna incident remains under investigation as a potential infrastructure failure. You are not to present your theory of orchestrated attacks disguised as accidents as established fact. Do you understand, Steiner? Ingrid felt the familiar friction between objective truth and institutional necessity. The evidence was screaming attack, but the system required a signed confession and a traceable weapon to even whisper it. Understood, Director, Ingrid replied, acknowledging the constraint. She would work within the system where she could, but the director's caution meant she would also have to find ways to gather the concrete proof he demanded, perhaps by delving into the very shadowy history Moreau was hesitant to acknowledge. The secure connection terminated. Anya's face remained on the screen, sharing Ingrid's quiet frustration. He's covering the political angle, Anya said softly. He has to. But the data is solid, Ingrid. That energy pulse was artificial. Those compounds weren't from a gas pipe. Ingrid leaned back, the glow of the monitor reflecting the grim possibilities in her eyes. Moreau was tied by procedure, by the need for undeniable proof. But the pattern was there, subtle yet chilling, pointing not to random misfortune but to calculated design, disguised as everyday tragedy. If official channels wouldn't pursue the anomaly, she would have to find the solid ground herself, digging where the rules didn't want her to. The Phoenix Protocol. She had to understand its capabilities, its origins, who controlled it. The answers weren't in the data streams flowing from Vienna or the recent files on Elias Thorne. They were buried, she suspected, in the frozen conflict of the past, waiting to be thawed. It was time to look back, deep into the restricted D archives of the Cold War. But history, especially the kind cloaked in state secrets and forgotten programs, rarely gives up its ghosts easily. The dust gathering on those old files held more than just information. It held buried truths that powerful entities wanted left undisturbed. Venturing into that labyrinth of declassified documents and redacted reports wouldn't just be a search for knowledge, it would be an intrusion. And intrusions, especially into secrets this sensitive, had a way of attracting unwanted attention, the kind that preferred to operate unseen, watching those who got too close, ready to issue a warning. The past was calling, but answering it might reveal dangers that were far from confined to history books. Chapter 4. Whispers of Phoenix. Ignoring the implicit warnings and the sheer weight of history, Ingrid dove into the labyrinth of Europol's legacy archives. Decades of classified files, layers of redaction and censorship flickered across her screens, a digital vault she had resolved to crack open. Searching keywords that felt like disturbing graves, conditioning, activation protocol, experimental subjects, she felt the chilling sense that some secrets were meant to stay buried, guarded by more than just digital firewalls. She knew the truth of Vienna's unnatural collapse lay somewhere within this frozen conflict of the past. Scene 1, Europol headquarters, via secure remote access from Budapest, Digital Archives interface. The temporary office the Hungarian police had provided was functional but sterile, a box of beige walls and flickering fluorescent light. It felt a million miles from the vibrant, sometimes chaotic energy of Budapest outside, and further still from the quiet intensity of Ingrid's usual analytical corner at Europol HQ. Yet through the secure connection humming on her laptop, she was back in the heart of the beast. Not the sleek public face of international cooperation, but the deep, dusty repositories of secrets and failures. Ingrid leaned forward, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The Europol archives were less a single library and more a layered palimpsest of information inherited and compiled from a score of national agencies. It required not just access, but an intuitive understanding of how data was categorized, cross-referenced, and, crucially, hidden. She wasn't just looking for files on something, she was looking for the ghosts of something. Fragments left behind in unrelated reports, buried in footnotes, or implied by patterns of sudden data gaps. Her initial search parameters were broad, drawing on the disparate threads: Elias Thorne's impossible resurrection, the strange biological anomalies, the precise, almost surgical destruction in Vienna, the Phoenix Protocol flag, the cryptic whispers of old names and old roots from Laszlo. Sleeper agent activation, post-mortem reanimation theory, dismissed quickly. Anya Sharma's data, ruled out actual death and revival. Controlled biological state, long-term storage of human assets. The hits we re-sparse, often buried within analyses of Cold War-era spy networks or psychological warfare studies that were now largely historical curiosities. Hours bled into one another. The screen became her world, a landscape of digital folders, encrypted pathways, and tantalizingly incomplete documents. She bypassed initial-level restrictions using legitimate, if underutilized, cross-departmental access code meant for comprehensive threat pattern analysis. She filtered by date range, focusing on the height of the Cold War and the chaotic decade that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall, periods rife with experimental programs and loose ends. Then, a flicker. A heavily redacted report on experimental Soviet psychological conditioning techniques mentioned a potential application in maintaining subject compliance over extended periods. A cross-referenced file, almost entirely censored, bore a cryptic alphanumeric identifier. Following that thread led to a fragmented internal memo from the early 90s discussing the auditing and potential termination of certain ethically compromised projects initiated during the height of geopolitical tension. It was a tedious, frustrating process. Each potentially relevant document was a puzzle box, forcing her to infer meaning from context, from the very words that remained after the black ink of censorship had done its work. She felt like an archaeologist digging through a digital ruin, piecing together shards of a forgotten civilization. And then the codename began to surface, not in bold headlines, but whispered. A reference in a list of project identifiers to be decommissioned. Project Nightingale, Project Chimera, Project Phoenix. Another in a summary of collaborative programs with a now-defunct Eastern Bloc intelligence service. Exchange on techniques, see also Phoenix-related protocols. A third, buried in an annex of a counterintelligence report detailing potential enemy capabilities. Rumors persist regarding deep cover assets developed under Phoenix framework. The pieces were scattered, incomplete, but the name recurred, always associated with highly classified experimental and clearly problematic activities. The references were vague, but pointed towards something that involved long-term manipulation or storage of human subjects, perhaps even a form of programmed obedience or activation. It resonated with Anya Sharma's biological anomalies, the synthesized compounds designed, Anya speculated, to modulate neural function. The digital trail grew colder as she pushed further back or attempted to access documents linked directly to these ethically compromised projects or the Phoenix framework. The permissions layers thickened. Standard access wasn't enough. She needed her clearance, specifically for programs flagged under national security or diplomatic sensitivity headers. Ingrid paused, rubbing her temples. She had found the name. It was real, rooted in history, and tied to the kind of programs that official narratives preferred to forget. But to understand what Phoenix was, who was involved, and why it was reactivating now, she needed to see what was behind the firewalls she had encountered. She needed access to the deepest layers of the archive. Scene 2, Budapest Police Station, Ingrid's temporary office or meeting room. The sterile office felt smaller now, more confining. Ingrid closed her laptop, the digital echoes of Phoenix still buzzing in her mind. She needed to make the call she knew would be difficult. She dialed Director Moreau's secure line. His face appeared on the screen, looking more tired than usual. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, the set of his jaw tighter. "Steiner," Moreau said, his tone clipped, lacking his earlier supportive facade. "Director, I've been reviewing the historical archives," Ingrid began, her voice steady despite the tension she felt. Following the Phoenix Protocol flag and linking it to the biological anomalies Dr. Sharma found in Thorne and the unique energy signatures in Vienna. Moreau held up a hand, cutting her off. "I saw your access attempt, Steiner. You've been poking around in some extremely sensitive areas." "I believe these areas are relevant," Ingrid pressed. I've found fragmented references to something called Project Phoenix, dating back to the late Cold War. It appears to have been a highly classified program, possibly involving human conditioning or long-term asset deployment. Speculation, Moreau said flatly, based on incomplete, heavily redacted historical data. But the name correlates, Ingrid argued, and the context of the scattered references suggests something that could explain Thorne's state and the Vienna incident. It aligns with the scientific evidence. Moreau sighed, running a hand over his face. Steiner, I'm telling you, this isn't just a bureaucratic hurdle. I've been receiving calls, queries, from higher up, from other agencies. They know you're digging into this. They know you're connecting Thorne and Vienna. Ingrid felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Who? It's not one agency, Moreau said evasively. It's a confluence of interests. People who were involved back then, people who inherited certain legacies. They are deeply uncomfortable with you dredging this up. They see it as destabilizing, as raking up scandals best left buried. Scandals? Ingrid echoed. Or active threats? They don't see a threat, Moreau insisted, leaning forward slightly, his voice lowering. They see a potential embarrassment, a political firestorm. They want you to stop, to focus on Thorne as a simple, albeit strange homicide, to write off Vienna as a tragic accident with unusual factors. But that's not what the data shows, Ingrid said, frustrated. It shows a deliberate, sophisticated act linked to a historical program. We have scientific proof of the anomalies, and now historical hints of the framework. Hints are not proof, Steiner, Moreau snapped, then softened his tone slightly. Look, I went out on a limb authorizing your investigation into the correlation between the anomalies. I cannot, and will not, authorize you to dive headfirst into Cold War BLAC projects that powerful people want forgotten. Access to those deeper archives? Denied, explicitly. I'm told there are significant sensitivities, political, historical, even questions of international law. Leave it alone, Steiner. But Director, if this program is active, if it's behind these events, then we handle it through established channels, carefully when we have undeniable proof, Moreau interrupted, his voice firm. Not by blindly digging into buried history and antagonizing forces we don't understand. Focus on the present, the body. The Vienna data as anomalies, nothing more officially. Do you understand? This isn't a suggestion, Steiner. It's an order. For your own protection as much as anything else. They're watching. The call ended abruptly. Ingrid stared at the blank screen, denied, ordered to stand down, at least on the most critical front. She felt a surge of anger and frustration, quickly followed by a chilling realization. Moreau wasn't just being bureaucratic, he was genuinely worried, and the pressure he was under was significant. They're watching. The forces that wanted Phoenix buried were powerful enough to reach into Europol and lean on a director. The path forward, it seemed, wouldn't be through official channels. Hours later, the frustration still simmered beneath Ingrid's composed surface. She was back on her laptop, ostensibly reviewing mundane police reports Kovacs had provided about other minor incidents in Budapest, but her mind was reeling from Moreau's call. Denied. Watched. The institutional labyrinth had just sprouted barbed wire fences. She had pushed the boundaries of her legitimate access as far as they would go. The deeper layers of the archive remained locked, tantalizingly out of reach. How else could she learn about Phoenix? Unofficial channels? Who would know about something this deep, this sensitive, from decades ago? Laszlo was useful for the present-day underworld, but a Cold War ghost program? Unlikely. Suddenly, a small, almost imperceptible alert flickered in the corner of her screen. It wasn't a standard notification. It was from a secondary, highly encrypted communication protocol she used for extremely sensitive, off-the-record contact with sources who couldn't risk official channels. A protocol so obscure and layered with proxies, it was virtually untraceable. She hadn't received a message on it in years. Curiosity warring with caution, Ingrid clicked the alert. The message opened in a simple text-only window. No sender address, no subject line, just a block of text fragmented, almost poetic, like a riddle. The bird sleeps not. Its song is in the wires, the stone. They walked once, now rise again. Old roots remember the step. The keeper watches, your light is seen. Turn back, or follow the whisper. Ingrid read it again, slowly. The bird, Phoenix. Its song in wires and stone, a reference to technology, architecture, perhaps cities. They walked once, now rise again. Thorn, the dead operatives. Old rotes remember the step. Laszlo's mention of old rotes being used for a delivery. This wasn't just random cryptic nonsense, it connected. The keeper watches. Moreau's warning, they're watching. Someone powerful, controlling access, wanting secrets kept. Your light is seen. She had attracted attention with her digging. Turn back or follow the whisper. A direct warning, followed by an invitation? A path? Who was this? A Cold War veteran with a conscience? Someone still caught in the web of this project? The mention of Nightingale in that fragmented project list earlier flashed in her mind. Was this Nightingale? Another bird, linked perhaps to Phoenix? She immediately initiated a trace protocol on the message, routing it through a dozen different secure proxies and decryption layers. Within moments, the system reported back. Origin untraceable. Channel self-destructed upon opening. Exactly what she expected from a source operating in the deep shadows. The cryptic message pulsed in Ingrid's mind, a dissonant counterpoint to the official silence. It wasn't just confirmation that Phoenix was real. It was a lifeline cast into the deep, cold water of buried history. The whisper spoke of secrets, yes, but it also spoke of places. Places where the shadows of the past still lingered, where the fault lines of a divided world ran deepest, leaving scars that never truly healed. The implication hung heavy. The truth wasn't just hidden in archives, but etched into the very geography of a world long past, now stirring violently in the present. And if the whisper was right, if this phantom operation truly drew its power from those haunted decades, then the next echo wouldn't be a quiet one. It would be a detonation, a calculated strike in a city still wrestling with its own divided soul. Ignoring it was no longer an option. The trail, faint as it was, pointed away from Budapest, towards the east, towards ghosts that refused to stay buried. Ingrid knew where she had to go next. Chapter 5. Berlin Echoes. The cryptic whisper had predicted an echo, a detonation in a city divided. Ingrid hadn't needed to search for long for the next sign. Just hours after Moreau's denial and the message's arrival, news reports, initially fragmented, began filtering through the secure Europol network. Chaos unfolding near the site of a notorious Cold War checkpoint in Berlin. The initial assessment spoke of structural failure, but the emerging details, the specific location, the nature of the devastation, resonated with a terrible familiarity, confirming this was the pattern she now hunted. Ingrid sat hunched over a temporary workstation in her modest Budapest hotel room, the bland decor a poor substitute for the structured predictability of her Europol office, or even the functional space she'd occupied at the Budapest police station. The laptop screen displayed a feed of raw incident reports and initial press releases scrolling with brutal efficiency. Each new detail from Berlin tightened a knot in her stomach. The location, the collapsed shell of a building that had once housed offices overseeing border traffic at Checkpoint Charlie, a potent symbol of Cold War division. The reported cause, structural failure, perhaps exacerbated by recent utility work. The reality, as Ingrid saw it, a calculated act, mirroring the Vienna incident with chilling precision. Casualties were minimal due to the building being largely disused, but the message was loud and clear. She didn't wait for the official Europol alert. She navigated to the secure video call application and initiated a direct line to Director Moreau's office in The Hague. The connection was slow, a stark contrast to the speed at which the world seemed to be changing around her. Moreau appeared on screen, his face etched with fatigue and irritation. The secure link showed he was in his private office, away from prying eyes. "Steiner, I told you to stand down on the historical investigation. What is it?" "Director," Ingrid began, her voice steady despite the frantic pulse in her veins. "Berlin, the incident near Checkpoint Charlie." Moreau frowned. "Structural failure. Tragic, but what's your connection? We have BKA handling it." "It's not structural failure, Director. It's another incident. The target location's historical significance, the immediate reports of the nature of the collapse, it mirrors Vienna. Synchronous points of failure, minimal fire, unusual pulverization of mad aerials. It's the same signature, I'm certain of it." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Certainty requires proof, Steiner. Vienna was anomalous. This could still be a coincidence, a tragic coincidence." Coincidence doesn't target historically relevant Cold War sites. Vienna was linked to intelligence activity during that era. This location in Berlin is a nexus of it, and Anya's preliminary scans from Vienna showed trace biological markers similar to Thornese. If Berlin shows the same, it confirms the pattern. It confirms Phoenix. Moreau sighed, a long, weary sound. Phoenix, you're pushing this. Do you understand the implications? Officially linking these events requires evidence that can withstand international scrutiny, not just your intuition and some confusing forensic data. It's not intuition, Director. It's analysis, pattern recognition. These aren't accidents. They're attacks, disguised, targeting symbols of a past conflict, using methods linked to a dormant program that resurrected Elias Thorn. I need to be on site in Berlin. I need to coordinate forensic sampling, see the destruction firsthand. Budapest was necessary, but the pattern isn't local. It's pan-European, rooted in history. Moreau regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken pressure from the higher-up he'd mentioned. He knew she was right about the pattern, but authorizing her movement, explicitly connecting her investigation to the Berlin accident, was a risk. "Very well, Steiner," he said finally, his tone clipped. "I'll arrange for your reassignment. You'll coordinate with BKA on the ground, but you are strictly there as a Europol analyst assisting with forensic data correlation. No speculation about wider conspiracies, no public statements, no unauthorized contact with external agencies. Work the data. Find the link. If you find definitive, irrefutable evidence tying this to Vienna and Thorn's markers, report only to me. Discretion is paramount. They are Joachim. Understood, Director. Inspector Kovacs will continue local leads on Thorn in Budapest. You're on your own in Berlin, aside from BKA liaison. Travel arrangements will be made immediately. Go dark, Steiner. No loose ends." The call ended, leaving Ingrid alone in the silent room, the chilling implications of Moreau's final words echoing in her mind. They are watching. And Phoenix was rising, leaving a trail of destruction that stretched across the continent. She began packing, the sterile efficiency a shield against the creeping dread. Berlin was a city of ghosts, layers of history visible in scarred buildings, memorial sites, and the palpable sense of division that lingered despite reunification. The air felt colder, heavier than Budapest. Ingrid was met at the airport by Detective Inspector Brandt, a lean, sharp-eyed man from the BKA, Bundeskriminalamt, Germany's federal police. His initial demeanor was polite but coolly professional, bordering on skeptical. Another Europol analyst flying in on a hunch about a gas leak, he'd seen it at L. "Inspector Steiner," Brandt said, giving a short, formal nod. "Welcome to Berlin. Tragic business at the old border building. Gas main failure, preliminary reports suggest." "Detective Inspector," Ingrid replied, offering a small, equally formal nod. "I appreciate you meeting me. My interest is specific, correlating forensic data with a recent incident in Vienna. Europol is trying to establish if there's a pattern of anomalous technical signatures in seemingly domestic incidents across the EU." She kept her language carefully neutral, adhering to Moreau's directive, letting Brandt connect the dots himself, if he chose. Brandt's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. "Anomalous technical signatures? You suspect sabotage?" "I suspect data points that deviate from expected norms for this type of event," Ingrid corrected smoothly. "Dr. Anya Sharma, our lead forensic tech analyst, has identified some unusual readings from the Vienna site. We're curious if Berlin presents similar anomalies." His skepticism softened slightly, replaced by professional curiosity. "Interesting. We have our own teams, of course, but fresh eyes and specialized data analysis. Follow me. The site perimeter is secured." They drove through the busy Berlin streets, the contrast between the bustling modern city and the site of recent destruction stark. The building near Checkpoint Charlie was a twisted concrete skeleton, the upper floors pancaked onto the lower ones. Dust still hung in the air, mingling with the scent of ruptured gas lines and damp rubble. Uniformed police and rescue workers moved slowly through the debris, a scene of painstaking recovery and investigation. Brandt led her through the secured perimeter. "Investigation is slow. Structural engineers, gas company, forensics, everyone's got a theory. Hard to make sense of it. Looks like a controlled demolition almost, but no explosives detected, no charges placed, and the gas reports are conflicting. Some sensors registered a leak, others didn't until after the collapse. Ingrid nodded, her gaze sweeping over the scene. It did look controlled, too clean, too precise in its devastation for the chaotic violence of a gas explosion. She pulled out a tablet, preloaded with schematics and satellite imagery, and began cross-referencing with Dr. Sharma, who was waiting remotely at Europol HQ. "Anya, are you receiving my stream?" Ingrid murmured into a bone conduction earpiece linked to her tablet. "Loud and clear, Ingrid. What do you see?" Sharma's voice was a calm presence in the chaos. Confirming Brandt's assessment, collapse pattern appears uniform, almost deliberate. Minimal signs of outward blast force you'd expect from a gas explosion. Concentrated structural failure points. She directed her tablet's camera. "See the pulverized concrete here near the base? Like in Vienna. And look at this rebar, sheared cleanly, not twisted as it would be in a chaotic explosion. Sending thermal and spectral analysis routines for your portable unit. Focus scans around structural load-bearing points, particularly lower levels. And look for any unusual residues, crystalline structures, faint discoloration, anything." Ingrid spent the next hour meticulously scanning, photographing, and observing under Brandt's watchful eye. He asked questions occasionally, his initial skepticism replaced by a growing, quiet concern as he saw her systematic, detail-oriented approach. "You're seeing something we're missing, aren't you, Inspector Steiner?" Brandt said finally, watching her scan a section of collapsed wall. "I'm looking for specific anomalies, Detective Inspector," Ingrid replied, not looking up. "Readings that deviate from known parameters for standard building materials and failure modes." Her tablet pinged. "Sharma. Ingrid, readings confirmed, detecting localized high-intensity energy signatures pulsing just before the point of collapse in multiple structural elements. Spectral analysis matches the non-thermal, non-explosive profile from Vienna." Ingrid's breath hitched. "And the residues?" "Affirmative. Trace synthetic organic compounds detected within the failure zones, spectrally similar, almost identical, to the markers found in Elias Thorne's tissues and at the Vienna site. This wasn't an accident, Ingrid." She straightened, looking at the devastation, the human cost. It was horrifyingly clear now. Vienna wasn't an isolated incident. Berlin wasn't either. These were calculated acts of destruction, using technology linked to the program that had held Elias Thor for 8 years. The pattern was undeniable. The thread led back to Phoenix. Brandt watched her face. He saw the moment her professional detachment cracked, replaced by grim certainty. "What did you find?" he asked softly. "Evidence," Ingrid said, her voice low. "Evidence that this wasn't an accident, and it's connected to Vienna. The same signature, the same anomalies." She paused, then decided to push cautiously, and possibly connected to a historical program I'm investigating, related to a missing operative. Brandt's eyes narrowed, but he didn't immediately dismiss it. He'd seen enough here that didn't fit the easy narrative. A historical program in Berlin? "This city has deep historical ties," Ingrid said, gesturing around the site at the ghost of the wall standing nearby. "Intelligence, division, secrets buried deep." Later that afternoon, after submitting her initial findings and anomaly confirmations to Brandt and the BKA forensics team, carefully framing it as unusual technical data requiring further analysis, Ingrid found herself needing space to process. She took a walk through a quiet park near the Spree River, the autumn chill biting at her cheeks. Her phone, a secure burner provided by Europol, remained silent. Moreau wouldn't call unless it was urgent. Kovacs was back in Budapest. She was alone in this historical labyrinth. As she sat on a bench overlooking the water, the phone vibrated. A notification for a new message on the secure channel Nightingale had used. No sender ID, no subject line. She opened it. The message was brief, a series of coordinates and a date. 52.517 13.3888E, 1983-0412. Followed by, "The bird nested where the city split." He was there. Before. "Look at the archive. The one they tried to burn. Be careful, little light. They see you here." Ingrid's mind raced. The coordinates. She quickly cross-referenced them on her encrypted map app. They pointed to the general vicinity of the former headquarters of the Stasi, the East German secret police. The date, 1983-412, meant something significant happened there or involving someone connected to that location on that specific day in the height of the Cold War. The bird nested where the city split, a clear reference to Phoenix, the location where the program originated or was centered. The Stasi HQ was a logical, chilling place for a clandestine operation like Phoenix to have been based, especially one potentially involving conditioning or asset deployment during the Cold War. He was there. Before. Who? Someone significant to Phoenix. Someone connected to that location, on that date. Elias Thorne? Or someone involved in creating the program? Nikolai Volkov? Look at the archive, the one they tried to burn. The Stasi archives were vast and notoriously complex, some partially destroyed during the fall of the wall, others preserved. Nightingale was pointing her towards a specific, possibly targeted part of that archive, perhaps one containing information related to Project Phoenix, individuals involved, or events on that date. Be careful, little light. They see you here. The warning, sharper this time. Her presence in Berlin, her successful connection of the accidents, had drawn attention. Nightingale's earlier cryptic message had mentioned the keeper watching. Now it seemed they were watching too. The same powerful interests Moreau feared. The surge of adrenaline wasn't just a warning, it was a confirmation. She had touched the live wire and the current was flowing directly back to her. Phoenix wasn't a ghost of the past, it was a predator, and she had just announced her presence in its hunting grounds. The silence that fell wasn't peace, but the coiled tension before a strike. They knew. And knowing them, they would not wait. She knew their method, the carefully constructed illusion of chaos, the fatal incident masquerading as an accident. Somewhere, unseen, plans were already shifting, parameters being adjusted. The hunt had indeed become dangerous, but the true test wasn't finding them anymore. The true test was surviving them, starting with the next step she took, the next street she crossed, the next breath she took in this suddenly very unforgiving city. Chapter 6. Target acquired. The promise of violence hung in the Berlin air, a stark contrast to the deceptive quiet of the afternoon, as Ingrid moved swiftly through the Mitte district. Knowing they saw her, knowing they would not wait, every nerve ending felt exposed, scanning the urban landscape for the next step. Nightingale had warned her about. It arrived not from the shadows, but the mundane flow of traffic, a sudden deafening roar of engines behind her, followed by a sickening screech of tires that didn't signal braking, but a deliberate, accelerating swerve straight towards her. There was no time to think, only to react as the world dissolved into a violent, deafening chaos aimed specifically at her. Ingrid had arranged to meet Inspector Kovacs near the location Nightingale's message had indicated, not the immediate area of the Checkpoint Charlie building collapse, but a few blocks away, closer to the former Stasi complex, the coordinates and date, 1983-04-12, echoing in her mind. Kovacs, having flown in from Budapest earlier that morning at Ingrid's request, was meant to provide ground support and a necessary local anchor, his pragmatic presence a welcome counterpoint to the abstract dread that had settled over her. They were walking along a relatively quiet side street, the hum of traffic a distant backdrop, sunlight glinting off modern glass facades and older, more austere Soviet-era buildings. Ingrid was explaining the fragmented information from Nightingale, the Stasi archive lead, the chilling implication of a specific date connected to a location steeped in Cold War surveillance. Kovacs listened, his expression a familiar mix of professional attention and underlying skepticism, though the latter had significantly diminished since the Vienna and Berlin incidents. "So, you think this Nightingale wants you to dig into old Stasi files?" Kovacs asked, hands in his pockets, his gaze sweeping the street as they walked. "Files that the Stasi themselves tried to destroy?" "The message suggested it," Ingrid replied, the words feeling inadequate to convey the weight of the cryptic instructions, and that someone important connected to Phoenix was there on that specific date. The air pressure changed. Not a gust of wind, but something denser, faster. The hum of traffic behind them sharpened into a focused shriek. Ingrid's head snapped around. A black van, nondescript and moving with unnatural speed, had broken from the main road. It wasn't merely driving fast, it was accelerating directly at them, cutting across the sidewalk with terrifying precision. The vehicle's path wasn't random, It was aimed with the chilling intent of a predator calculating a strike. "Ingrid!" Kovacs shouted, shoving her violently forward. The shove sent her stumbling. Her mind, usually a calm processor of data, was flooded with raw instinct. She twisted, throwing herself towards a narrow gap between two parked cars. The world became a blur of motion and noise. The roar of the van's engine, the scream of tires, the sickening crunch of metal as the van grazed the car she'd almost reached. Pain lanced up her arm as she hit the asphalt, scraping her elbow raw. Disoriented, she scrambled, shoving herself further into the meager space between vehicles. The van didn't follow. It didn't swerve wildly out of control. Instead, with the same terrifying, controlled precision, it corrected its course, accelerating back onto the street and vanishing around the corner, leaving behind only the echo of sound and the smell of burnt rubber. Silence descended, thick and unnatural. Ingrid pushed herself up, adrenaline coursing through her veins, heart hammering against her ribs. Her elbow throbbed, her knee smarted, and her shoulder ached where Kovacs had shoved her. Kovacs was already on his feet, hand instinctively going to his sidearm, though it was useless now. His face, usually stoic, was pale with shock and fear. "Are you all right?" he gasped, rushing towards her. Ingrid nodded, testing her limbs. Nothing broken, just scrapes and bruises. The shock was the worst of it, the sudden, brutal confirmation that this wasn't just an intellectual puzzle anymore. I think so," she managed, her voice shaky. "You?" "Fine. Just Jesus, Ingrid. That wasn't an accident." Kovacs stared down the street where the van had disappeared. His earlier skepticism was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective anger. "They tried to kill you. Right here, in broad daylight. The attack had been too precise, too controlled. No wild braking, no panicked swerving away. It had been a targeted strike, executed with chilling efficiency, then a clean retreat. It mirrored the accounts of the Vienna and Berlin incidents. Not chaotic accidents, but calculated, destructive acts disguised as something mundane. Ingrid looked around. People were starting to emerge from nearby buildings, drawn by the noise. A few pointed, their faces a mixture of alarm and curiosity. She needed to get out of sight, analyze what had just happened, and understand how. "We need to move," she said, pushing off the car and ignoring the pain. "Now, before someone calls the police and we have to explain this." Kovacs didn't argue. He helped her up, his grip firm, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. They ducked into the nearest building entrance, a nondescript lobby, trying to blend in, bodies tense with the aftermath of the near-fatal encounter. Back in the relative safety of Ingrid's hotel room, a bland, functional space that now felt like a fragile fortress, the adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a dull ache and a profound sense of vulnerability. Ingrid sat on the edge of the bed, carefully dabbing at her scraped elbow with a damp towel from the bathroom. Kovacs was pacing the small room, on his phone speaking rapidly in Hungarian, presumably to his technical contact or relaying information through secure channels without explicitly detailing the attempt just yet. "They used a dark van," Ingrid recounted, her voice steadying as her analytical mind reasserted control over the physical shock. "No markings I could see. It came out of nowhere, but it wasn't random. The way it swerved, it was like it was locked onto us. Onto me. It didn't lose control, it just aborted the final impact when I got out of the way." Kovacs ended his call, his expression grim. "My contact is checking traffic cameras in the area. If there's any footage, maybe we can get a plate, a description. But you said it was nondescript? Could be stolen, cloned plates?" "Likely," Ingrid agreed. "But that's not the key item, it's how it was done. The precision. It felt controlled, like it wasn't just a driver, but something more." She opened her secure laptop, carefully positioning it on the bedside table. "I need to talk to Anya. Right now." Within minutes, Dr. Anya Sharma's face appeared on the screen, her background the familiar organized chaos of her lab at Europol HQ. Her usual cheerful, slightly disheveled look was replaced by sharp concern as she took in Ingrid's appearance. The scraped D-arm, the paleness, the tension in her posture. Kovacs hovered nearby, his presence a silent, protective anchor. "Ingrid, what happened? Moreau just sent an alert that you'd been involved in an incident." Anya's eyes narrowed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Ingrid said, though the lie felt thin. "Minor injuries. But it wasn't an incident, Anya. It was an attempt. A deliberate attempt on my life, disguised as a traffic accident." Anya's expression hardened instantly. Disguised? Yes, and I think it connects to the others. Ingrid quickly explained what had happened. The suddenness, the van's unnatural speed and precision, the lack of a typical panic driver reaction. I need you to look at something. Kovacs's contact might get us street camera footage, but I want you to prepare to analyze any trace evidence from the site if we can get samples. And think about how a vehicle could be used as a precisely controlled weapon like that. Is there any theoretical overlap with the energy signatures you found? Kovacs, while waiting for news on the camera footage, had already taken photos of the scrape marks on the parked car the van had hit. The angle of the damage even scraped off a tiny amount of paint transfer onto a sterile pad he carried. He handed the pad and his phone to Ingrid. Anya's eyes scanned the images Ingrid held up to the camera, her brow furrowing in concentration. The scrape pattern, that's unusual. Clean, almost like a cutting action, despite being paint and metal. She paused, accessing data on her own screen. Mora, you gave me preliminary details. He mentioned a black van, apparently recovered, abandoned a few blocks away shortly after, wiped clean. But the local police found trace residues. Anya clicked something on her end. They sent me a sample from the impact point on the abandoned van and from the parked car that was hit. Initial spectral analysis, Ingrid, Kovacs. You're not going to believe this. She brought up a complex graph on her screen, overlaid with multiple lines. The trace residues found on both the van's impact area and the stationary car match spectrally with the unique synthesized organic compounds we found in Elias Thorne's Neurologica L tissue. And they show a significant overlap with the trace residues from the Vienna building collapse and the Berlin building collapse site. Ingrid felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Scientific confirmation. Undeniable proof. The compounds are present in higher concentrations on the van's contact surface, Anya continued, her voice laced with scientific awe mixed with grim understanding. And there are faint but detectable energy signatures embedded in the material structure of the van's front bumper and the paint of the parked car that correlate with the non-thermal energy pulse detected in Vienna and Berlin. It's like the van itself was briefly energized, or the contact point activated, to cause that precise, controlled impact force. It's not blunt trauma, it's structured energy transfer, mediated by these unique compounds. She looked directly at Ingrid, her gaze steady and serious. This wasn't a driver losing control, Ingrid. This was a deliberate, highly calculated attempt to neutralize you, using the exact same methods and signatures as the Vienna and Berlin attacks, and linked directly to the biological anomalies found in Thorne. It was a targeted assassination attempt by Phoenix. The air in the small hotel room felt suddenly thin. Kovacs swore softly in Hungarian, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. Ingrid absorbed the data, the scientific precision of Anya's findings overlaying the terrifying chaos of the past hour. It wasn't just a theory anymore. They weren't just targeting structures or reactivating old agents. They were targeting her. "They see me," Ingrid murmured, the words from Nightingale's message taking on a chilling new weight. Just like he said. "See you and consider you a threat," Kovacs stated, his voice flat. He looked at Ingrid, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and intense concern. "They want you gone, and they used this." He gestured vaguely towards the laptop screen. "This impossible e-science, disguised as an accident." The pragmatic Hungarian detective, the man who dealt with street crime and murder, was looking at something far beyond his usual experience, and his reaction was visceral. He wasn't skeptical anymore. He was a protector. "You need security, Ingrid. Now. Europol, BKA, someone." Ingrid nodded slowly, processing the implications. Security would hinder her movements, alert others, make her a larger target in some ways. But Kovacs was right. She was no longer just an analyst. She was a target. Later that evening, the hotel room now under discreet surveillance arranged by Kovacs, Ingrid sat across from her laptop screen, facing the concerned but now fully engaged face of Director Moreau. Anya Sharma was present on the call as well, ready to provide the technical backup. Moreau looked older, lines of stress etched deeper around his eyes. The initial alert he'd received about Ingrid's incident had clearly escalated rapidly with Anya's findings. "Steiner," Moreau began, his voice grave, Anya has briefed me on her analysis of the residues and energy signatures from the van incident. Is that correct, Dr. Sharma? Absolutely, Director, Anya confirmed, her tone professional and unwavering. The spectrographic and energy signature analysis shows a conclusive match with the anomalies found in Subject Thorn, the Vienna collapse site, and the Berlin collapse site. The pattern is identical. This W was a deliberately orchestrated event using the same methodologies. Given analyst Steiner's presence and recent investigation focus, the only logical conclusion is that she was the intended target. Moreau leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Ingrid. The bureaucratic shield he usually wore seemed to have cracked. He saw not just a case, but the face of one of his analysts who had almost been killed. An assassination attempt, Moreau stated, the words hanging heavy in the air, on a Europol analyst in Berlin, using methods linked to a presumed dead MI6 operative and 2 major accidents in different European cities, disguised as a traffic collision. He shook his head, running a hand over his face. This changes everything, Steiner. Ingrid watched him, the silent struggle visible in his posture. He was caught between the terrifying reality she had uncovered and the immense political pressure he faced. You were right, he admitted, his voice low. It wasn't just speculation. This Phoenix project, it's active, and it's deadly, and it sees you as a critical threat. He paused, considering. The agencies, the confluence of interests I mentioned, they're still applying pressure. They want this contained, controlled. They don't want the history exposed. But they tried to kill me, Director, Ingrid stated plainly, with the same signature as the attacks. That's undeniable proof. It is, Moreau agreed, and Europol cannot stand by while its analysts are targeted on European soil. Not like this. He straightened up, his resolve hardening. I will use this attempt as leverage, undeniable proof of state-level or equivalent hostile action using unknown means. It gives me more room to push back against the containment efforts. He looked at Ingrid with newfound respect, mixed with the lingering caution of a man navigating dangerous political waters. You were right about the pattern, right about the connection to Thorn, right about Phoenix being active, and now they've proven you're right by targeting you. What does this mean? Ingrid asked. More resources, more freedom to investigate, or tighter restrictions for her own safety? It means we escalate, Moreau said firmly. Unofficially, for now. I will secure additional resources, technical and personnel. Kovac will remain with you. We will liaise discreetly with BKA and MI6, but the official lead, the real lead, stays with you. We need to understand how they are doing this, the science behind the anomalies, the activation protocols, the full history of Project Phoenix. Anya, I need you to dedicate everything to reverse engineering those signatures and compounds. Find out what they are, what they do, how they function. Ingrid, you need to find the historical context, Nightingale's lead on the Stasi archives and the date. It's our best shot at understanding the origins and identifying the key players. He fixed her with a stern, yet trusting gaze. But you are a target, Steiner, a confirmed, high-value target. You operate with extreme caution from this moment on. Trust no one you don't absolutely have to. They demonstrated today they can reach you anywhere, make it look like anything. Your survival is now paramount, not just for you, but for this investigation, because you are the one connecting the dots. The assault wasn't merely an attempt on her life. It was a chilling confirmation, a message sent with deadly precision. They knew who she was and what she was digging into. Phoenix wasn't a ghost from the past. It was a very present, very lethal force, and she was directly in its sights. The fear was a cold knot, but beneath it, a hard resolve solidified. Survival now hinged entirely on understanding how this ghost project functioned, why it had been resurrected, and identifying the architect pulling these deadly strings. There was no more turning back, only forward into the heart of the mystery. The answers lay scattered across disparate sources. The cold data from Elias Thorne's body, the whispered warnings from Nightingale, the dark history buried in Stasi archives, and the cutting-edge forensic science waiting in Anya's lab. To live through the hunt, she had to become the hunter, piecing together the horrifying technical reality of the Phoenix and the identity of the man who dared to wield its power again. The next step was no longer about uncovering secrets. It was about arming herself with no ledge before the enemy struck again. Chapter 7. The Nature of the Phoenix. The cold knot of fear from the van's near miss still tightened in Ingrid's gut, but now it fueled a singular purpose. Phoenix was not just a target to be found. It was a weapon to be dismantled, starting with understanding how it could turn the dead into assassins. Hours after the attack, she connected with Dr. Anya Sharma, whose lab deep within Europol's secure facility hummed with forensic analysis, ready to peel back the layers of impossible science. The chilling truth of the Phoenix's operational reality was about to come into horrifying focus. "Ingrid, can you hear me clearly?" Anya's voice, slightly distorted by the secure video link, was usually bright and energetic. Today, it held a tremor of grim intensity. She appeared on Ingrid's screen, framed by the familiar organized chaos of her forensic lab. Monitors displaying spectral analyses, shelves lined with chemical reagents, complex machinery whirring softly in the background. Ingrid sat in a sterile, temporary office provided by the BKA in Berlin, the city's muted sounds a distant hum. "Clearly, Anya. What have you found? The van, the samples? Is it what we thought?" Ingrid's voice was taut, betraying none of the lingering physical ache from her fall, only the urgent focus of her mind. Anya nodded, her expression serious. "Worse and more fascinating than we thought. Yes, the residues from the van and the grays on the vehicle match Thorn, Vienna, and Berlin perfectly. The same unique synthesized organic compounds, the same anomalous N-Ergy signatures. It was a targeted assassination attempt, confirming you are a high-value threat to them." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But that's just the confirmation, the breakthrough. The breakthrough is how they're doing it, or rather how they did it to Thorn, and how they're replicating the effects now." Anya turned to a larger display behind her, which flickered to life, showing complex neurological diagrams and spectral analysis graphs. "We've managed to isolate and analyze the primary synthesized compound from Thorn's neurological tissue, cross-referencing it with trace elements found at the attack sites, and crucially in the small quantities scraped from the van. It's incredibly complex, designed at a molecular level to interact with specific neural pathways. It's not a neurotoxin, not a simple stimulant. Think of it more like a biological key." She pointed to a section of a diagram showing neuronal connections. "We now have strong evidence, cross-referenced with some historical research the director authorized after your incident, that Thorn, and presumably others like him from the original program, underwent a form of extreme deep-layer psychological conditioning years ago. Decades, potentially. Conditioning so profound it wasn't just behavioral, it imprinted patterns directly onto the neural architecture." Ingrid leaned forward, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the desk. "Conditioning? You mean brainwashing?" "That's a crude term for it," Anya corrected, her tone clinical despite the horrifying subject. "This was something far more advanced, subliminal, layered over years, perhaps even initiated during periods of duress or captivity. It wasn't designed for immediate use. It was dormant, a hidden structure within their own minds, waiting." She gestured to the spectral graph. "This compound, let's call it the activation trigger, is designed to locate and unlock that dormant programming. It acts as a chemical key, turning a biological lock." On the screen, a simulation began, showing a simplified neuron receiving signals. When a representation of the chemical trigger was introduced, new, distinct pathways within the neuron illuminated, firing in a structured, non-random pattern. When the trigger is administered, Anya explained, her voice low, it doesn't just wake them up, it activates the latent conditioning. It takes individuals who might have been living normal lives for years, individuals like Thorn, officially dead, and overlays a command structure onto their consciousness. It's not just memory recall, it's operational overlay. They become highly effective assets, capable of complex tasks that leverage their existing skills, whether that's combat proficiency, demolition expertise, or even just blending into a crowd. Ingrid felt a chill crawl up her spine, colder than any Berlin wind. So Thorn wasn't just kept alive, he was a weapon, dormant for 8 years, and then activated? Precisely, Anya confirmed. And the accidents, Vienna, Berlin, the attempt on your life, they weren't chaotic acts. They show the same signature, precise, controlled application of force or action using someone activated by this trigger. The van driver, for example, executed a perfect, calculated maneuver. They aren't mindless drones. They are agents operating under a specific, triggered directive. Their personality might still be there, buried, but the Phoenix programming is currently dominant, driving their actions. The implications, Ingrid began, her voice trailing off. People weren't just brought back. They were turned into ghosts controlled by remote strings. Are immense, Anya finished for her. It means anyone who underwent this original conditioning, and we have no idea how many there were, could be out there, living normally, waiting for the trigger. And the trigger can be administered quickly, potentially even surreptitiously. Why? Ingrid asked, looking at the chilling simulation. Why activate them now? The accidents, what purpose do they serve? Anya brought up a map showing Vienna, Berlin, and a few other locations Ingrid hadn't yet connected, points highlighted and connected by faint lines. We've been theorizing, are they purely destructive testing, demonstrating the capability, refining the T-rigor? Is it a cover for something else, using the chaos of the attacks to move personnel, resources, or information undetected? Or, she paused, her gaze fixed on the map, or are these incidents building towards something? A sequence? A timing mechanism? Could these synchronized, disguised attacks in major cities be setting the stage for a much larger, coordinated event? The map points pulsed on the screen, ominous in their potential alignment. The attacks weren't random acts of terror disguised as accidents. They were calculated steps in a sequence, carried out by untraceable, controlled agents. The nature of the Phoenix was horrifyingly clear. A Cold War ghost weapon, now unleashed and evolving, turning people into disposable assets. I need to process this, Ingrid said, feeling the weight of the revelation. Thank you, Anya. Keep working on reverse engineering the trigger. If we can understand its chemistry, maybe we can find a way to counter it. Anya nodded grimly. On it. Be careful, Ingrid. Knowing how they operate doesn't stop them. The video link cut out, leaving Ingrid alone in the stark office. The diagrams and spectral analyses burned into her mind's eye. Activated agents, dormant conditioning, a chemical key. It was a nightmare engineered from the darkest corners of intelligence history. And someone was holding the keys. Hours later, the city outside quiet, Ingrid sat before her laptop, accessing the secure channel Nightingale had used before. The channel was layered with multiple encryptions, designed to make tracing impossible. She hesitated for a moment, remembering Morrow's warning about being watched, the chilling message from Nightingale, the van attack. But Anya's findings had made one thing clear. She wasn't just investigating a cold case anymore. She was actively hunting a weapon that was already aimed. And Nightingale held a piece of the puzzle. She typed, detailing the van attack concisely but clearly, emphasizing the methodology, the same Phoenix signature. They tried to stop me, using the same methods. The reply wasn't immediate. The cursor blinked, a tense, silent pause. Ingrid held her breath, the cheap office chair suddenly feeling too flimsy. Then text appeared, scrolling rapidly. Understood. The fire rises. Too soon. Too risky. The tone was different tonight, less cryptic warning, more distress, regret. This wasn't the plan. Not yet. Ingrid pushed. Who's doing this? Who reactivated Phoenix? The archives. You said 1983, Stasi HQ. He was there. Tell me. Another pause. Longer this time. Ingrid imagined the person on the other end, considering weighing the risks. The attempt on her life seemed to have shifted something. Operation Phoenix was sanctioned, yes. The text finally appeared, slowly now, deliberate. A blackest of black projects, mid-Cold War. The goal, create assets capable of deep infiltration, long-term sleeper deployment. Men and women so thoroughly conditioned they could be inserted, live normal lives for years, even decades, until needed. Activated remotely. Ingrid's eyes scanned the words, connecting them to Anya's clinical explanation. Dormant conditioning. Activation trigger. The methods were extreme, unethical. The psychological toll immense. Even the hardliners were appalled by the results. Too many breaks, or perhaps too much power in too few hands. Officially, it was terminated in the late 80s. Files burned, participants reassigned or vanished. Nightingale paused again, then the crucial words began to form. But one saw it not as a failure, but as a prototype, as potential untapped. He was instrumental in its conception, brilliant, ruthless, convinced the future belonged to those who could manipulate not just information, but human reality itself. Who? Ingrid typed again, her finger hovering over the key. His name, a ghost from the past. Once high in the structures, then disappeared when Phoenix was buried. The text stopped, then reappeared lower down. Nikolai Volkov. Nikolai Volkov. The name was unfamiliar to Ingrid, a product of her generation's archives, not the lived reality of the Cold War's upper echelons. But the implication was clear. Volkov, Nightingale continued, he didn't let it die. He rebuilt from the ashes he created, improved the trigger, refined the conditioning. He waited, and now he is testing the weapon. Ingrid's mind raced. Volkov, a ghost, the architect. He wasn't just reactivating an old project. He had been the driving force behind its creation and was now its master. The accidents, Ingrid typed. Vienna, Berlin. The attempt on me. What is the test? What is he building towards? Timing, Nightingale replied. Sequence. Disruption. He is orchestrating chaos to hide his true objective. Each step is a beat in a terrible rhythm. You must look for the pattern, the target the Phoenix is circling. The connection severed, but the chilling silence left behind was louder than any signal. Ingrid was alone, but no longer in the dark about who was pulling the strings. Nikolai Volkov. The name settled, heavy and cold, revealing not a historical footnote, but a present, deadly architect. The puzzle of how the dead walked was solved. Now began the desperate hunt for the man who commanded them, the shadow figure orchestrating a terrifying return of Cold War nightmares in a modern world. Finding a ghost from the past, a master of misdirection who had vanished decades ago, would demand more than standard protocols. It meant peeling back layers of deception, navigating encrypted echoes, and tracing trails through networks built like labyrinths, shell corporations, defunct contacts, and digital whispers hidden in plain sight. The true objective remained shrouded, but each incident, each accident, felt like a calculated step towards a final devastating blow. The clock was ticking, and Ingrid had to find Volkov, expose his ultimate target, and stop him before his deadly symphony reached its terrifying crescendo. Chapter 8, The Architect Revealed. The chilling silence after Nightingale's call left Ingrid with a name, heavy and cold in the quiet space. Nikolai Volkov. The architect of this terrifying resurgence was no ghost from history, but a present, deadly force, and the abstract terror now had a face. The puzzle of how was solved, the urgent hunt for who commanded them and why, began immediately. She opened Dr. Sharma's detailed analysis, placing it alongside the fragments of Cold War history Nightingale had revealed, preparing to fuse the science-y of Phoenix with the identity of its master and begin tracing the first threads of his hidden network. The Europol Data Analysis Center wasn't a single grand room, but a network of secure climate-controlled chambers filled with the low hum of servers and the quiet clicks of keyboards. Ingrid Steiner sat at a large, multi-monitor workstation in a small, sterile room, the polished steel and muted gray surfaces reflecting the clinical nature of the data she was processing. On one screen, Dr. Anya Sharma's complex diagrams pulsed, neural network schematics overlaid with markers for the synthesized organic compounds, timelines correlating chemical introduction with behavioral shifts, theories on subliminal command structures. On another, scanned images of dusty, redacted Cold War-era documents flickered, official-looking headers, handwritten annotations, cross-references to Project Phoenix or simply the Bird, names blacked out but occasionally, tellingly, incomplete redactions leaving tantalizing fragments. Hours had passed since the van attack in Berlin, hours spent sifting through the chilling implications of being a target and the terrifying mechanism that had almost killed her. Now, with Anya's scientific validation and Nightingale's historical anchor point, the abstract threat coalesced around a single name. Anya, Ingrid said, her voice steady over the secure video line displayed on a third monitor. Anya Sharma's face, framed by the sterile glow of her lab, looked weary but focused. The compounds you isolated in Thorn, in the Vienna and Berlin debris, and now traced to the van, the activation trigger. You're certain it unlocks dormant neural pathways imprinted with conditioning? Absolutely, Anya confirmed, gesturing with a stylus at a complex diagram. It's molecularly designed to interact with specific protein structures we found woven into Thorn's neural architecture. Think of the conditioning as a complex lock, inert for years. The trigger is a bespoke key, Introduce it, and the lock turns, opening up access to those conditioned responses. It's elegant, terrifyingly precise, not brainwashing in the crude sense, but sophisticated layered programming. It leverages existing capabilities and overlays a command structure. And the sites? Ingrid pressed, minimizing Anya's screen momentarily to pull up satellite images of the collapsed buildings. Vienna, Berlin, historical significance, symbols of past conflicts or reconciliation. The attacks were precise, almost surgical, despite the appearance of chaos. The energy signature is the key there, Anya replied. Localized, non-thermal, non-explosive disruption at a molecular or submolecular level. It destabilizes structural integrity with incredible accuracy, controlled release of the stored energy within materials themselves, like a targeted decay cascade. The organic compounds, the trigger, were present at the attack origins, perhaps as a necessary component or catalyst for the energy release. Or maybe they were already there in individuals triggered nearby. We're still working on that link. But the pattern, it suggests a specific methodology, a signature. Someone knows how to do this, and they're doing it deliberately. Ingrid nodded, bringing up the scanned documents again. Nightingale gave me a name. Nikolai Volkov, instrumental in the original Phoenix concept, disappeared when the project was supposedly terminated, and he's the one who resurrected it. She spoke the name aloud, testing its weight. Nikolai Volkov. She began cross-referencing the name. Keywords Phoenix, Volkov, Project Bird, Stasi collaboration, linking to the Berlin archive hint, 1983-412, Nightingale's date. The Europol database, vast but heavily compartmentalized, yielded fragmented results. Brief service record, technical background, specialization in psychochemistry and strategic asset deployment. Connected to a defunct research institute tied to military intelligence. Mention of international contacts, particularly in Eastern Bloc countries. And then, the abrupt end. A file flag disappeared, presumed defected, compromised, dated shortly after the suggested project termination date. Europol archive query priority alpha. Ingrid dictated into a headset, eyes scanning the monitors. Cross-reference Nikolai Volkov with any recorded communications, financial transactions, travel logs, or intelligence reports dating from post-1983 to pre-sent. Filter for activity patterns potentially masked as shell corporations, front organizations, or use of historically significant but currently defunct communication methods, specifically targeting potential encrypted ghost channels. A quiet, efficient voice responded through the headset. Query initiated, Analyst Steiner. Accessing restricted legacy protocols for ghost channel analysis. Results may take time. Data fragmentation is significant. Understood. Prioritize patterns suggesting reactivation of old network contacts or leveraging historical infrastructure, Ingrid instructed. She pulled up a map interface, marking Budapest, Vienna, Berlin. The incidents were geographically diverse, but clustered in Central Europe, areas rich with Cold War history and interconnected underworlds. Anya, any updates on the isotopic ratios in Thorne's tissues? Could they give us a geographic indicator? Preliminary analysis suggests long-term exposure to specific mineral compositions common to certain geological regions, possibly caves or deep underground facilities, Anya reported. Combined with the synthesized compounds, it paints a picture of a controlled, isolated environment for years. We're trying to narrow down the geological signature, but it's slow going. Ingrid added a mental note. Underground facilities, old routes. Laszlo's mention of a delivery using old routes in Budapest echoed back. Was Thorne delivered from one of these historical holding sites? As the background processes churned, spitting out fragmented data points that the support staff began collating. Shell companies registered in various jurisdictions, cryptic financial transfers routed through complex international webs, faint echoes of encrypted bursts on frequencies not used commercially in decades. Ingrid stared at Volkov's sparse profile image on screen, an intelligent, unsmiling face from decades past. This man, presumed gone, had spent years refining Phoenix, testing it on operatives like Thorne, waiting, and now he was making his move. The attack on her wasn't random. It was confirmation she was disrupting his carefully planned sequence. "He knows I'm hunting him," Ingrid murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The thought solidified her resolve. Knowing who didn't stop him, finding him did. Director Moreau's face, projected onto the secure video screen in Ingrid's workspace, was etched with a grim blend of concern and weary resignation. The casual skepticism from the initial briefing was long gone, replaced by the heavy weight of undeniable evidence and escalating political pressure. "Steiner," Moreau said, his voice low and carefully modulated. "The BKA forensic report from Berlin corroborates Sharma's findings completely. The signature matches Vienna, and the report from the van incident, the traces on the vehicle are conclusive. This was a deliberate attempt on your life, using the same methodology as the attacks." He paused, letting the gravity sink in. "You were right. This isn't structural failure or gas leaks. This is calculated, and it's deadly." Ingrid nodded, her posture straight despite the lingering ache from her scrapes. "It's Volkov, Director. Nikolai Volkov. Based on historical records, Nightingale's confirmation, and the operational signature, he is the architect and controller of the reactivated Phoenix Protocol." She presented her findings concisely, the fragmented historical links, Volkov's background, his disappearance coinciding with the original project's supposed termination, Anya's scientific validation of a complex, refined system, and the emerging digital footprint pointing to reactivated networks and financial proxies. "His methods are precise and layered," Ingrid continued. "Disguising targeted attacks as accidents provides cover and sows chaos. He's testing the weapon, the trigger, the conditioned assets, and refining delivery methods. But the attacks aren't random. Vienna, Berlin, they're steps in a sequence." She pulled up a visual representation of the incidents, marked on a European map. Red dots blinked over the two capitals. "We're tracing his digital and financial trail, looking for connections, operational hubs, and a pattern in the targets themselves. The locations aren't just symbols. They might relate to his past, the original project, or feed into a larger goal." Moreau steepled his fingers, his gaze distant for a moment. "Volkov, the name resonates in certain circles, a bogeyman from the Black Projects. If he truly has resurrected Phoenix, the implications are catastrophic. An undetectable weaponized human asset program, capable of precise, deniable attacks anywhere, and he's using it openly." "He's testing it," Ingrid corrected. "Each incident gives him data, refines his timing, assesses our response. But the pattern suggests he's building towards a final significant event. The chaos serves to distract, to make it look like disparate accidents or regional issues. But I believe the attacks are converging on something specific." Moreau sighed, leaning back in his chair. "The pressure, Steiner, is immense. National agencies are in an uproar. Some are demanding full control. Others are trying to bury it, fearing the exposure of past ghosts. There's a faction that still dismisses the coordinated attack theory as speculation, or worse, a deliberate destabilization effort by someone else. They don't want to believe a Cold War project is back online under the control of a phantom." "The evidence is undeniable, Director," Ingrid stated firmly. "Sharma's data, the matching signatures, the attack on me. Which is precisely why I'm pushing back against the attempts to sideline this," Moreau said, his voice gaining a harder edge. "Your survival, your work is critical. You are currently our best chance at understanding and stopping this. I've managed to secure limited, discrete resources for your team. Kovacs remains your liaison on the ground where needed. Sharma has carte blanche for forensic analysis. Access to cross-agency legacy data is tricky, but I'll lean on some old favors. But understand, you are operating under extreme scrutiny, and you are a high-value target. You must maintain discretion. Any leak, any misstep that gives these other agencies leverage, and I won't be able to protect your investigation, or you." "Understood, Director." The official support was a necessary shield, but Ingrid knew Moreau's resources were finite against the power Volkov commanded and the institutional inertia she faced. The real hunt would require navigating the shadows. "Find him, Steiner," Moreau said, his gaze hardening. "Find Volkov, and figure out what he's planning before he executes it." The screen went blank, leaving Ingrid with the weight of the director's words and the chilling image of the red dots on the map. The hunt for the architect had begun in earnest, and the target of his chilling ambition was coming into focus. Ingrid sat alone at the workstation, the glow of the monitors illuminating the determined set of her jaw. The secure room felt less like a workspace and more like a command center now, albeit a solitary one. She had printed out large-scale maps of Europe, pinning them to a corkboard beside the monitors. Red pins marked Vienna and Berlin. She added a few smaller yellow pins marking other incidents that had caught her eye in the Europol reports. Suspicious industrial accidents, sudden structural failures in nondescript buildings, strange power grid fluctuations that had initially been dismissed as technical glitches. They didn't all have the exact Phoenix signature yet, but they shared an unusual precision and timing. She connected the red pins with a taut length of string, then added lines to the yellow ones. The lines crisscrossed the map, forming complex, overlapping vectors. On a digital whiteboard beside the map, she listed dates, times, and the nature of each incident. Vienna, historical site, symbolic, mid-morning. Berlin, historical site, symbolic, former intelligence hub area, mid-afternoon. Potential other incidents, industrial hub, data center, transportation node, specific dates, times. Volkov wasn't attacking randomly. He was orchestrating chaos, yes, but with an underlying structure. What connected these locations and times? She consulted the historical data again, filtering for Volkov's known movements before his disappearance, his technical background, the rumored objectives of the original Phoenix project, long-term penetration, disruption, creating assets capable of operating deep within enemy territory. The Stasi archive lead from Nightingale lingered, Berlin, 1983. Was Volkov targeting places or events connected to his past, to people who had opposed him or the project? She pulled up a global events calendar, overlaying it onto a timeline synchronized with the incidents. Were the attacks timed to coincide with specific political meetings, economic summits, cultural events? The Vienna and Berlin incidents hadn't directly disrupted any major international events, but they had occurred during periods of heightened diplomatic activity in those cities. The attacks, she realized, were like trial runs, or maybe steps in constructing something larger. They weren't the final objective, but means to an end. What kind of end? Disruption? Yes, but localized. Destabilization? Perhaps, but not widespread yet. Access to what? Data? Infrastructure? People? She stared at the map, at the converging lines. If these were steps, where were they leading? What event? What location? What target could be the culmination of years of planning and refinement? Volkov was testing his weapon, honing his technique. He knew she was watching. The attack on her was proof he was adjusting his plan, incorporating her as a variable. She leaned closer to the map, adding potential targets based on the patterns. Major financial districts, international organizational headquarters, key transportation hubs connecting east and west, locations tied to significant historical anniversaries, venues hosting high-level diplomatic meetings. The possibilities were vast, terrifying. But the incidents had a common thread beyond their signature. They struck at symbols of stability, connection, and the established post-Cold War order. Vienna, a bridge between East and West. Berlin, the reunited city, a symbol of history overcome. The precision, the disguise, it was designed to sow distrust in the mundane, to make people question safety in everyday life, while the true target remained hidden. She ran a simulation on the digital whiteboard, using Volkov's known background, the pattern of attacks, and potential high-value targets. Cities flickered. Brussels, NATO, finance. London, finance intelligence. Prague, historical significance. Paris, major capital. The tension in the room tightened with each possibility. A major event, a critical location. It had to be something significant enough to warrant the years of preparation, the risk of reactivating a dormant program, the expenditure of highly valuable asset S, access to critical data, eliminating key individuals, or something purely symbolic designed to shatter confidence on a global scale. She adjusted the parameters of the simulation, focusing on locations tied to international cooperation and security. Her gaze fell on a specific city, hosting a major upcoming conference focused on cybersecurity and international intelligence sharing. A confluence of high-value targets, critical data infrastructure, and a symbolic event promoting transparency and cooperation, everything Volkov seemed to oppose. The lines on her map, the timestamps of the incidents, the locations, the historical echoes, they began to align, pointing like silent arrows towards that possibility. Ingrid stared at the network analysis, the terrible shape of Volkov's masterpiece now horribly clear, identifying who and hypothesizing what felt like only the first step up a sheer, dark cliff face. The real challenge, the one that pressed down with suffocating urgency, was the where, finding the nerve center of his operation, the hidden location where the final, catastrophic piece was poised to fall. The theoretical labyrinth of ghost channels and encrypted communication had to become a tangible place, a chilling sanctuary hidden somewhere in the forgotten corners of the world. But the clock was not slowing, and the labyrinth wouldn't yield its secrets from behind a desk. Every second spent navigating bureaucracy, every official channel followed, felt like a gift of time to the architect. Stopping him required more than analysis. It demanded immediate action, a dive headfirst into the physical darkness he had created. The race against time now had a destination, however hidden, and the descent into Volkov's domain was about to begin. Chapter 9. Descent into the Labyrinth. The chilling coordinates, the terrifying destination of Volkov's labyrinth, finally resolved into a single point on the screen before Ingrid. Hours had vanished in the frantic cross, referencing and leveraging of every limited resource Moreau could spare. Every fragment Anya and Kovacs could dig up, but the ghost channels had yielded a physical location. It lay shrouded in the forgotten borderlands of the old blocks, a tangible sanctuary for the architect and his final act. The analysis was complete. The time for the descent into the physical darkness was now. The small, sterile room Ingrid had commandeered felt suddenly vast, empty. On the monitor, a satellite image showed a sprawling, derelict industrial complex nestled deep within a dense, unnamed forest miles from the nearest paved road. It looked like a forgotten scar on the landscape, precisely the kind of place old Cold War ghosts might gather. Kovacs stood beside her, arms crossed, his expression grim. Dr. Anya Sharma's face, tired but sharp, filled a secure video window on a secondary screen. The isotopic analysis from Thorn, combined with the echo data Anya pulled from the Berlin site's residual energy signature, and the communication fragments Kovacs found in Laszlo's network, they all triangulate here. Ingrid's voice was steady, but the tension in her shoulders was palpable. It's a former Soviet military installation, decommissioned in the late 80s, officially abandoned. But the power grid traces show intermittent high-level consumption peaks consistent with localized energy projection equipment, and the chemical signatures match the activation trigger compound and the residue from the attack on me. This is it, Volkov's sanctuary. Anya nodded, her gaze fixed on the coordinates. The energy signatures aren't just for structural collapse. They correlate with the resonance patterns needed to broadcast the activation sequence across a significant radius. It's a broadcast antenna for chaos. Director Moreau's face appeared in a separate window, projected onto the wall. He looked even more weary than usual, shadows under his eyes deepening the lines of political fatigue. Steiner, your analysis is compelling, disturbing even. The converging data points make a strong case. But launching a full-scale operation, crossing multiple borders, targeting a site in a country whose intelligence agencies are complex, it's politically impossible right now. The agencies watching you, the ones blocking deeper historical access, they refuse to sanction this. They want deniability, distance. They're arguing it's still circumstantial. Ingrid's jaw tightened. Circumstantial? He tried to kill me. He collapsed buildings in 2 capitals. He's bringing back conditioned assets and is about to launch an attack on a major international conference. What more proof do they need? A mushroom cloud? Her voice rose, edged with frustration and a cold fury born of being hunted. Steiner, temper your language, Moreau warned, though his tone lacked its usual bureaucratic crispness. I understand your urgency. I do. I've pushed back. I've cited the attack on a Europol analyst. I've used the forensic reports from Sharma. But the internal resistance is immense. They see this as a potential geopolitical nightmare, reviving specters they want to keep buried. The most I can secure is continued, discreet technical support from Dr. Sharma and official cover for Inspector Kovacs to remain with you as a liaison. Any direct action is off the books. You are essentially on your own. Ingrid looked from Moreau's troubled face to Kovacs' resolute one. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of the decision. Official channels, designed for collaboration and diplomacy, were choked by fear and denial. Volkov wouldn't wait. The timing of the previous attacks, the hypothesized target city, it was happening soon. All right, Ingrid said, her voice low, firm. Then I'll go on my own. Ingrid, wait, Kovacs stepped forward. You think I'm letting you walk into this alone? After everything? After they tried to run us down? My jurisdiction is Hungary, technically, but paperwork can be flexible. I'm with you. Laszlo's network has resources outside official channels if we need them. Transport, maybe even equipment. A faint, appreciative smile touched Ingrid's lips. Kovacs, thank you. Moreau sighed, a sound of defeat and reluctant acceptance. Very well, Inspector Kovacs, you have my unofficial blessing. Maintain plausible deniability at all costs. Steiner, you are operating outside standard protocol. The moment you cross that border, you have no official standing beyond your liaison cover. You are ghosts pursuing a ghost. Sharma, give them everything you can remotely. Access codes, sensor arrays, anything that can help them navigate this labyrinth. Anya nodded eagerly. I'll prep a secure uplink, encrypted comms, and a suite of non-traceable digital tools. Sensors for energy fluctuations, chemical residue, maybe even ground-penetrating radar if they can deploy it. I'll be blind after a certain point, but I can guide you to the edge. Stay safe, both of you, Moreau said, the projection fading. This is beyond dangerous. The screens went dark, leaving Ingrid and Kovacs alone in the quiet room. The coordinates still glowed on the main monitor, a beacon of imminent danger. Ingrid looked at Kovacs. We're stepping into the deep end now, Adam, she said, using his first name for the first time. It's not the first time, he replied, his expression unreadable. Let's pack light and fast. The journey was a blur of anonymous transport and hushed conversations. They left Budapest under the cloak of late afternoon, a nondescript car taking them eastwards. As dusk settled, they switched to a rattling, ancient train that smelled of coal smoke and forgotten lives, burrowing deeper into the old Eastern Bloc countryside. The landscapes outside the window became increasingly bleak. Vast, empty fields, silent forests, villages that seemed stuck in time. Every stop felt isolated, every fellow passenger a potential observer. Ingrid sat by the window, watching the darkness gather. Her analytical mind, usually processing data streams and historical texts, was now calculating logistical risks, border crossings, potential surveillance, the distance to the target. She had changed eye into practical, dark clothing, leaving her usual tailored professionalism behind. She carried a small bag containing a few essentials, Anya's encrypted comms and sensors, and a heavy weight of responsibility. They'll notice we're gone eventually, Kovacs said quietly from across the aisle. He was dressed similarly, looking less like a police inspector and more like a weathered traveler. Moreau will cover for as long as he can, Ingrid replied, her voice barely a whisper. Plausible deniability cuts both ways. If we succeed, it was a brilliant off-book operation. If we fail, we were rogue agents pursuing a wild conspiracy. Kovacs gave a short, mirthless chuckle. I prefer the first outcome. Me too, Ingrid agreed, but we have to be prepared for the second. Volkov knows I'm hunting him. The attack in Berlin proved that. He'll be expecting something. Maybe not us specifically, but he knows someone is close. He's expecting police, military, perhaps a coordinated raid, Kovacs mused. Not an analyst and a regional liaison arriving on a derelict train. Precisely, Ingrid said. It's our only advantage. Subverting expectations. We're not here to take down an army. We're here to find him, to understand what he's doing, and if possible, to stop it. They discussed the sparse intelligence they had on the area surrounding the complex. Old rumors of forbidden zones, local folklore about strange lights or disappearances. It all added to the oppressive atmosphere of the journey. Their partnership, forged in the sterile labs of Budapest and tested by fire in Berlin, deepened with each passing mile. They were 2 points of light venturing into profound darkness, relying solely on each other and the faint signals from Anya back in The Hague. As the train groaned to a halt at a small unmanned station swallowed by forest well after midnight, they exchanged a look. This was it. The end of the line, figuratively and almost literally. The air was cold, damp, and silent except for the distant sounds of the forest. The nearest sign of civilization was miles away. Volkov's labyrinth awaited. They moved through the pre-dawn darkness, guided by faint moonlight and the minimal illumination from their encrypted devices. The forest surrounding the complex was thick, ancient, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and hidden roots, forcing them to move slowly, cautiously. Anya's sensor readings, transmitted via their secure link, showed fluctuating energy signatures ahead, like a low rhythmic pulse. Finally, the trees began to thin, revealing a high, barbed wire fence, rusting and partially collapsed in places, but still formidable. Beyond it lay the complex, a series of grim concrete buildings, hangars, and underground bunkers silhouetted against the pale glow of the eastern sky. It looked like a relic of a bygone era, utterly deserted. But Ingrid's instincts screamed otherwise. They found a weak point in the fence, partially overgrown with thorny bushes. Kovacs produced a small, efficient wire cutter. The snip was almost unnervingly loud in the silence. They slipped through, pulling the wire back into place as best they could. They were inside the perimeter. The grounds were vast, covered in cracked asphalt and concrete slabs, weeds pushing up through every fissure. Structures loomed in the distance. They moved low, sticking to the shadows of abandoned vehicles and decaying equipment left exposed to the elements for decades. Then they saw them. Not guards in uniform. Not even mercenaries. Figures. Two of them, spaced perhaps 50 meters apart, standing unnaturally still near a large, imposing hangar door. They were dressed in simple, dark civilian clothes, indistinguishable from anyone on a stray-at corner. But their posture was rigid, their gaze fixed and unblinking, scanning the perimeter with a focused intensity that went beyond normal vigilance. They moved occasionally, not pacing, but shifting their weight with a strange, synchronized precision like automatons. Phoenix assets, Ingrid whispered, her blood running cold. This was the reality of Anya's conditioning, not just abstract data. These were people, emptied and reprogrammed. Kovacs nodded grimly. They don't look like they feel the cold. They skirted wide, using the dilapidated buildings and overgrown vegetation for cover. The energy signatures Anya reported were stronger here, originating from within the structures. The two figures shifted, one turning its head with a sudden jerky motion that didn't seem quite natural. Ingrid froze, pressing herself against the cold concrete wall of a former barracks. Then she saw him. Further down the perimeter, near a smaller access point, a third figure stood watch. Taller than the others, broader across the shoulders. The posture, the way he held his head. Elias Thorne. It couldn't be anyone else. The man she had seen lying on a slab in Budapest, dead for 3 days, yet dead for 8 years. He stood sentinel, a silent, living ghost, his face obscured by shadow, but the profile, the bearing, unmistakable. He was an active, controlled part of Volkov's living arsenal. The sight was chill-and-G, a profound confirmation of the project's terrifying success and its utter disregard for human life. He didn't look like a prisoner. He looked like a loyal, programmed guardian. Kovacs followed her gaze, his eyes widening slightly in the dim light. "Thorne?" he mouthed silently. Ingrid could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. The impossible was real. They moved past Thorne's position slowly, meticulously, holding their breath. He didn't react, his gaze sweeping along a predetermined path. They were just outside his field of programmed vision. Finding a service tunnel entrance, hidden beneath a tangle of weeds, they slipped underground. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of damp earth and rust. The darkness was absolute, save for the narrow beams of their tactical lights. The tunnel led them deeper into the complex's forgotten infrastructure. It was cold, labyrinthine, a true physical manifestation of the investigative maze they had been navigating. Pipes dripped, unseen creatures rustled in the walls, and the low thrum of distant machinery vibrated through the concrete floor. They emerged into the basement level of what appeared to be a large administrative building, directly inside the perimeter fence they had breached. The basement was surprisingly clean, signs of recent activity stark against the pervasive decay elsewhere. Steel doors lined the corridors, many sealed tight. They cautiously approached a small room near the stairwell, which looked like a converted guard post. Inside, a single terminal glowed faintly, alongside communication equipment and a small, humming server rack. This was not abandoned tech. It was functional, recent. Kovacs moved to the terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Ingrid scanned the room, her hand on her sidearm, a precaution she had deemed necessary despite her lack of combat training. The energy signature here was much stronger, almost pulsing. "They didn't wipe everything," Kovacs murmured, eyes glued to the screen. placeholder files, communication logs, work schedules. Why would Phoenix need work schedules? To manage their assets, Ingrid realized, a sickening feeling in her gut. They're not just sending them out on one-off missions. They're maintaining them here, rotating them, keeping them ready. Kovac found a manifest file labeled Active Assets, Phase 3. He quickly scrolled through it. Names. Thorns was on the list. Others, Ingrid vaguely recognized from historical missing persons lists, flagged for potential intelligence connections. A chilling roster of the resurrected. Then, he clicked on a document titled Operation Kronos, Final Parameters. Ingrid, look at this, Kovac said, his voice tight. The document detailed a final activation sequence tied to specific timing codes and frequency parameters. It didn't name the target explicitly, but it referenced a simultaneous, multi-point energy broadcast, coordinated with a major, high-density network event. It cited projected network traffic and data flow patterns that matched precisely the cybersecurity conference Ingrid had hypothesized as the target in the previous chapter. The timeline was explicit. Activation window T-07 hours. 7 hours. They had breached the outer layer of the labyrinth, faced its chilling guardians, and found the heart of Volkov's clockwork mechanism. But they were just inside the door. Volkov, the architect, was deeper within, his hand on the switch, and the clock was ticking down. 7 hours. That number wasn't just a digital display. It was a countdown to a carefully orchestrated catastrophe, measured in the remaining pulse beats of a world unaware of the shadow rising to consume it. The true labyrinth lay ahead, a maze of defenses, controlled assets, and horrors Volkov had meticulously crafted in the darkness. There was no turning back, no time to hesitate at the threshold. Every second lost was a victory for the architect. The only path forward was into the very core of Operation Phoenix, into the belly of the beast where Volkov waited, surrounded by his chilling creations, the fate of thousands balanced on the edge of his command. They had to go deeper now, into the heart of the darkness, before the 7 hours ran out and the world burned. The Phoenix's heart, climax. The countdown clock felt less like a timer and more like a fuse burning down to the world's edge. Leaving the grim confirmation of Volkov's assets and his timeline behind in the service tunnel area, Ingrid and Kovac plunged deeper into the cold, echoing sea corridors of the former military base. Every shadow felt like a potential trap, every distant sound a controlled guardian. The true core of Operation Phoenix, the architect's heart, waited somewhere ahead, shrouded in layers of deadly defense they had to breach, fast, before the 7 hours ran out and the catastrophe Volkov planned could ignite. They moved with a heightened sense of purpose, a silent agreement passing between them. Kovac took the lead, his movements economical, body low, pistol held ready. Ingrid stayed close behind, eyes scanning walls, ceilings, listening for the almost imperceptible hum of hidden machinery or the telltale stillness of a programmed asset. The air grew colder, the echoes more metallic. The concrete walls, scarred and stained with age, occasionally gave way to sections of reinforced steel, doors sealed tight with modern electronic locks grafted onto ancient frameworks. This wasn't just a forgotten base, it was a meticulously upgraded fortress. They encountered the first obstacle 50 meters in, a heavy steel blast door blocking the corridor, sealed with a keypad. Kovac motioned Ingrid back. He tried conventional methods first, picks, a small bypass tool, but the system was complex, layered. Volkov invested heavily, he muttered, frustration tightening his jaw. Ingrid pulled out the secure tablet Anya had prepped for her. Anya's familiar, slightly hurried voice came through her earpiece. All right, Ingrid, send me a feed. Let's see what we're dealing with. Volkov's tech is sophisticated, but I've seen echoes of these signatures before. Old-school encryption layers. Maybe I can find a backdoor, or at least tell you where to aim your crowbar. While Anya worked remotely, eyes on the tablet feed showing the lock interface, they glimpsed their first active assets deeper inside this level. Passing a grated window set high in a wall, Ingrid froze. Inside a sterile, dimly lit room, 2 figures stood motionless, facing the wall. They wore simple gray uniforms, bodies utterly still, eyes vacant. Activation chambers. Seeing them like this, inert but ready, sent a fresh wave of cold dread through her. They weren't just bodies found in warehouses. They were being kept, maintained, prepared. This wasn't about one dead agent. It was about an army. Anya's voice crackled. Okay, I've found a weakness. It's designed to look like a standard failsafe bypass, but it's a legacy backdoor Volkov probably thinks is obscured. You need to interface the tablet here. A diagram appeared on Ingrid's screen. And then Kovacs, you'll need to apply pressure simultaneously. There. She directed them to a specific point on the doorframe. It was a blind bypass requiring perfect timing. Kovacs looked at the diagram, then at Ingrid. Ready? She nodded, gripping the tablet. On Anya's countdown, Ingrid initiated the bypass sequence on the tablet, while Kovacs used the butt of his pistol to strike the indicated point with precise force. A quiet thunk echoed, and the electronic lock gave a soft click. The heavy door began to hiss open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. One layer down, Anya breathed, relief in her voice. But expect more. The core should be heavily defended. They pressed on, navigating a maze of identical corridors. The deeper they went, the more evidence they saw of Volkov's chilling operation. More activation chambers, some empty, some holding silent figures. What looked like sterile medical bays. Server room MS humming behind locked doors. The air itself felt different now, regulated, filtered, carrying a faint, clinical odor underlying the mustiness of the old base. They rounded a corner, entering a wider, open space that felt like a former hangar bay converted into something clinical and terrifying. Here, several Phoenix assets patrolled in slow, deliberate patterns. Their movements were eerily synchronized, like clockwork. They didn't speak, their gazes fixed but unseeing, programmed to respond only to specific stimuli. Ingrid and Kovacs had to backtrack, finding an alternate route through ventilation shafts and narrow service passages, relying on Kovacs' instincts and Ingrid's spatial reasoning based on the base schematics Anya had sent them earlier. It was slow, tense progress, every scrape of their clothes against metal, every misplaced footstep, a potential disaster. They were surrounded by ghosts given artificial presence, a testament to Volkov's grotesque vision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of crawling through dust and shadow, they reached a point overlooking a large central chamber. Anya's voice was low in Ingrid's ear. Ingrid, you're directly above the primary energy signature we tracked. This is it, the core. They found a service ladder leading down, the metal cold beneath their hands. The air thrummed with a low, powerful energy. Descending into the chamber, the scene below snapped into focus. It was a command center, sleek and functional, despite being built within the shell of a Soviet relic. Banks of monitors glowed, displaying complex data streams, maps of Europe, and chillingly, the countdown timer they had seen upstairs, now larger, dominating a central screen. Server racks lined one wall, humming with processing power. In the center stood a raised console surrounded by more screens, and standing before it, overseeing the final preparations, was an elderly man. Nikolai Volkov. He was exactly as the fragmented intelligence suggested, late 60s, perhaps early 70s, immaculately dressed in a simple, dark suit that seemed out of place in the industrial heart of the base. His silver hair was neatly combed, his face etched rich lines of age and intellect. He turned as they entered, his eyes, sharp and alert despite his years, fixed on them without surprise. There was no fear, only a quiet, almost weary curiosity. He held himself with an air of serene authority, a conductor about to bring his symphony to its terrible crescendo. Standing beside Volkov, facing them, was Elias Thorne. He looked just as Ingrid had first seen him in the Budapest morgue, eerily devoid of expression. He wore the same gray uniform as the assets they'd seen above, but there was a terrible familiarity to his features, the curve of his jaw, the slight scar above his eyebrow. All markers confirming the man trapped beneath the programming. He held himself at parade rest, utterly still, his eyes fixed on Ingrid with that same unsettling blankness. "Analyst Steiner," Volkov said, his voice calm, almost conversational, carrying a faint, educated accent that could have been academic or military. "And Inspector Kovacs, I presume. I confess I did not anticipate your presence here quite so directly, though I have, of course, been aware of your persistence." Ingrid ignored the observation, her gaze locked on Thorne for a moment, then snapping back to Volkov. "Volkov, Operation Phoenix, Thorne, and the others. The attacks. It's all you." Volkov smiled faintly, a small, almost pleasant expression that did nothing to soften the cold intelligence in his eyes. Operation Phoenix, yes. A rather dramatic name, isn't it? Not mine, originally. A code name given by those who failed to understand its necessity, its potential. They buried it, called it unethical, impractical. Fools. They saw ghosts. I saw instruments of precise influence. He gestured around the room, encompassing the humming servers, the glowing screens. They built a fragile, complacent world on the ruins of strength, a world ripe for recalibration. Recalibration? Kovacs scoffed, moving slightly to Ingrid's side, his hand tightening on his pistol grip. Murdering civilians? Causing chaos? Chaos is merely a prelude, Volkov corrected, his tone patient, as if explaining a complex theory to children. The world is stagnant, power structures ossified. My assets are not simply agents of destruction. They are points of disruption. The accidents you have observed, Vienna, Berlin, your own regrettable near miss, analyst Steiner, they were rehearsals, tests of deployment, of the activation protocols, of the precise application of force disguised as structural failure or simple happenstance. He gestured to the large map of Europe on a screen, points of light blinking at the sites of the attacks. Another point pulsed, larger, ringed with symbols, the location of the major cybersecurity conference. The final phase, Operation Kronos, involves simultaneous activations, not just at the conference, though that is a prime target, a symbol of your interconnected vulnerable world. Across multiple points, symbols of post-Cold War unity, stability, cooperation, disruption, financial markets, infrastructure nodes, communication hubs, a wave of inexplicable failures and tragedies that cripple confidence, foster suspicion, and reopen old divisions. He paused, watching their faces. My assets, they are perfect, loyal, untraceable, programmed to execute. Think of the possibilities, gentlemen. A subtle push here, a fatal coincidence there. History, analyst Steiner, is not over. It merely requires a new deed, and I have the perfect tools for the job. They're not tools, Volkov. Ingrid's voice was sharp, cutting through his calm monologue. They're people. You've stolen their lives, their minds. They are assets, Volkov repeated, his smile fading, replaced by a chilling coldness. Refined instruments. The price of progress, analyst. And you are attempting to interrupt the final, critical calibration sequence. His eyes flicked to the countdown T-Mur. Insufficient time for philosophical debate, I believe. He turned to Elias Thorne. Asset designation Epsilon 7, Protocol Gamma Omega, neutralize intruders. Thorne moved instantly. It wasn't human motion. It was too fluid, too precise, entirely devoid of hesitation or self-preservation. He advanced towards them with frightening speed, a phantom brought to unnatural life. Kovacs raised his pistol, but hesitated, perhaps seeing the man beneath the programming, perhaps realizing the danger of a direct firefight in this confined space. Kovacs, cover me! Ingrid yelled, her mind racing. Volkov was focused on Thorne and his escape route. The control console was her target. While Kovacs moved to intercept Thorne, using his body as a shield, trying to grapple or subdue without lethal force if possible, Ingrid sprinted towards the main console, the data servers just beyond. The confrontation was brutal and heartbreaking. Thorne was incredibly strong, his movements honed to deadly efficiency by years of conditioning. He bypassed Kovacs' initial attempts to restrain him, his objective clearly Ingrid. Kovacs reacted, forced into a desperate close-quarters fight, blocking blows, trying to find leverage. Ingrid reached the console, fingers flying across the interface. She needed access to the activation trigger broadcast parameters, the command protocols. Anya, I'm in the core. Need to disrupt the broadcast. Volkov's protocol. Kronos. Find the signature frequency, the command sequence. Anya's voice was tight with urgency. On it. The energy readings are spiking. He's prepping the final trigger transmission. He's using a layered, dynamic frequency. Give me the console architecture. Fast! As Ingrid frantically navigated Volkov's system, trying to send architectural data to Anya while blocking Thorne's advance, the programmed asset was upon her. Kovacs was still locked in a desperate struggle, holding Thorne back, but Thorne's unnatural strength was formidable. He broke free, lunging towards Ingrid. He moved with the efficiency of a machine designed for one purpose. His hand, intended to snap her neck, reached for her. She scrambled back, knocking against the console. Her hand instinctively went to her pocket, finding the brass phoenix keyring from Thorn's minimal possessions. It felt absurd, futile, but on instinct she held it up towards him. "Elias!" she cried, forcing urgency, desperate hope into her voice. "The keyring. Budapest, Syria. Thorn, remember." For the briefest, most agonizing fraction of a second, something flickered in Thorn's blank eyes. A hesitation. The brutal efficiency of his programmed lunge faltered. It was like watching two competing programs collide, the deadly asset and the echo of the man. Kovacs, seeing the infinitesimal pause, seized the opportunity, tackling Thorn hard from the side, slamming him into a nearby server rack. The impact was bone-jarring. Thorn crumpled to the ground, his body convulsing once before going still, perhaps temporarily incapacitated, perhaps worse. The keyring clattered onto the floor. "Now, Ingrid!" Kovacs yelled, scrambling back to his feet, bruised but resolute, covering the still figure of Thorn. Ignoring the tremor in her hands, Ingrid focused on the console. "Anya! He's down! Got a direct link to the broadcast module. Got the frequency signature. It's complex, synchronized across multiple phased relays." Anya's voice was strained. "You need to inject a counter-frequency pulse, corrupt the data stream. It has to hit the main command packet before it broadcasts." The countdown timer glared. Ingrid didn't hesitate. Following Anya's rapid-fire instructions, she initiated a complex data injection protocol Anya had prepared as a last resort, accessing core broadcast relays, injecting counter-frequency, targeting command packet. The console interface screamed warnings, attempting to reject the foreign code. Volkov, who had watched the confrontation with Thorn with unnerving detachment, suddenly reacted, eyes widening slightly as he saw what Ingrid was doing. "No!" he barked, the calm finally cracking. He lunged for his own console, but it was too late. Ingrid hit execute. A high-pitched whine ripped through the air, overriding the hum of the servers. On the central monitor showing the countdown, the timer froze for a second, then began to flash erratically. Warning sirens blared through the complex. On the map of Europe, the pulsing light indicating the conference target dimmed, then vanished, along with several other points. "Success!" Anya's voice was weak with relief. "The main command packet is corrupted. Broadcast aborted. The primary activation sequence is neutralized." Ingrid leaned against the console, breathless, heart-hammering. They had stopped it. The immediate, devastating attack. But the alarms continued to shriek, changing pitch, indicating a system lockdown or purge. On Volkov's monitor, a new alert flashed, escape protocol initiated. Volkov didn't waste time. His serene mask was gone, replaced by cold fury, but his movements were still controlled, purposeful. He didn't attempt to retake the console or engage them further. He simply turned and moved swiftly towards a section of the wall that slid silently open, revealing a hidden passage. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Ingrid. His eyes held a chilling promise. "You have delayed, Analyst Steiner. A minor inconvenience, but you cannot kill an idea. Phoenix is not a place or a sequence. It is evolution, and it will rise again." With that, he vanished into the darkness, the panel sliding shut behind him. "Volkov!" Kovacs yelled, starting after him, but the passage was sealed tight. The facility was descending into chaos. Lights flickered. Secondary alarms sounded. The air felt thick with the sudden silence of systems powering down. "We need to go." Kovacs grabbed Ingrid's arm. "Now! He initiated something. Evidence!" Ingrid pulled away, grabbing a couple of key data drives from the now silent server racks near the console. Kovacs swept up a few scattered documents from Volkov's station. The floor buckled beneath their feet, and the air filled with the scream of tearing metal and the rumble of collapse. Dust chased them, a suffocating shroud, as they scrambled towards the distant exit light. Elias Thorn's still form was swallowed by the encroaching darkness and debris, a silent, irreversible sacrifice in a conflict not of his choosing. They ran, fueled by adrenaline and the primal urge to escape, leaving behind the core of Volkov's twisted empire as it tore itself apart around the stunned, silent Phoenix's heart. Breaking into the cold night air was not an arrival at safety, but a transition into a different kind of storm. The immediate, claustrophobic terror receded, replaced by the chilling sound of approaching sirens and the stark reality that the architect of this devastation, Volkov himself, had slipped through their grasp. The Phoenix's heart might be silenced for now, its pulse a faint echo, but the mind behind it was free, a promise whispered on the wind that this was merely the end of the beginning. For Ingrid, the ghosts of the past had stepped out of the data streams and into her reality, leaving her irrevocably changed, knowing the true cost was yet to be tallied, and the fight for the ashes in the horizon was only just dawning. Chapter 10. The Ashes in the Horizon. Breaking into the cold night air, the scream of sirens became a physical presence, lights strobing across the dust-choked exit point. They stood panting, exhausted and raw, amidst the settling debris of the sanctuary, watching the first official vehicles arrive, a swarm of flashing blue and red promising order, but also complications. Director Moreau's silhouette was visible among the figures emerging from the lead car, his arrival marking the transition from their rogue operation to the cold, hard reality of the aftermath. The core of Volkov's design lay in ruins, the Phoenix's heart silent, but the man himself was gone, leaving behind not just wreckage, but the unsettling horizon of a threat still very much alive. The air tasted of ozone and dust, thick with the recent violence and the sudden silence that had fallen after the chaotic alarms. Ingrid leaned against the rough concrete wall of the service tunnel exit, her legs trembling, lungs burning. Beside her, Kovas, equally battered and weary, slumped against the opposite side, his gaze fixed on the approaching lights. They were safe. The Chronos countdown stopped, Volkov gone. But the price of that success felt heavy, settling in the stillness around them like the fine gray ash on their clothes. Uniformed figures, a mix of local police, likely military special forces, and Europol quick response personnel, fanned out with efficient precision, securing the perimeter they had just breached. Ingrid watched them, a strange detachment washing over her. For hours, this place had been a terrifying secret, Volkov's private domain of resurrected ghosts. Now it was just a crime scene, albeit one unlike any other. Director Moreau was among the first to reach them, his face a mask of complex emotions, relief, stern authority, and perhaps a hint of professional awe. He stopped a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back, assessing them both. "Steiner, Kovacs," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "Report." Ingrid pushed herself upright, forcing coherence into her tired mind. "Chronos Protocol neutralized, sir. Broadcast frequency disrupted. Activation averted." Kovacs added, "Volkov initiated escape protocol. He's gone. We secured data drives from the main console before the system collapse accelerated." He held up a heavy-duty evidence bag containing the salvaged hardware. Moreau nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the entrance to the tunnel and the visible structure beyond. "And the facility? Assets?" "The main command center. It's unstable," Ingrid reported. "System integrity failed after the pulse. Some areas are collapsing. We saw chambers with individuals. Inert. Secured access points should be possible, but with extreme caution." She hesitated, then forced herself to voice the hardest part. "Elias Thorne. He was there. Epsilon 7. Volkov ordered him to neutralize us." Moreau's gaze sharpened. "Thorne?" "Conditioned," Kovacs finished grimly. "Like the others, we incapacitated him. He was near the console. We had to leave him when the collapse started." The unspoken question hung between them. His fate. Moreau turned to the commanding officer of the securing unit. "Prioritize structural assessment and asset identification. Non-lethal containment where possible. Forensics and data extraction teams on standby. And find Volkov." His voice was sharp, decisive. He then looked back at Ingrid and Kovacs. "You two are off duty, effective immediately. You'll be taken to a secure location for full debriefing. Standard procedure. My office will handle the liaison." His tone was official, covering a clear signal they were being protected despite the unauthorized operation. They were led away, past the flurry of activity. As they passed a secured access point leading into the depths of the complex, Ingrid caught a glimpse into a large, reinforced room. Several figures clad in the same gray uniforms Thorne had worn stood or sat unnaturally still, eyes vacant, guarded by heavily armed personnel. They were the Phoenix assets, found and contained, but their silent presence was a chilling testament to Volkov's terrifying success. The sight sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. They had stopped the attack, but the human cost was laid bare. They were placed in the back of a standard unmarked sedan, driven away from the controlled chaos of the sanctuary. The distance grew, The sirens faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the engine and the exhaustion settling deep in their bones. Ingrid leaned her head against the cool window, watching the pre-dawn light begin to paint the horizon. The ashes were here, behind them. But the horizon stretched before them, uncertain and potentially dangerous. The secure debriefing room was stark and impersonal, a windowless box designed for interrogation and information extraction. Several days had passed since their escape from the sanctuary, spent in a different kind of lockdown, comfortable but confined, under medical evaluation and initial questioning. Now came the formal accounting. Ingrid and Kovacs sat across a polished table from Director Moreau, and two individuals introduced simply as representatives, one from Internal Affairs, sharp-eyed and procedural, the other from a national intelligence agency, silent and assessing. Anya Sharma was present via secure video link, a familiar face in the clinical setting, ready to provide technical context. "Let's review," the Internal Affairs representative began, his voice clipped. "You proceeded with an unauthorized deep infiltration of a highly sensitive, potentially hostile facility after being explicitly ordered to cease operations and return to the Hague." Moreau interrupted smoothly. "They proceeded under my de facto authority when formal channels proved impassable. The evidence suggested an imminent, catastrophic attack. Their actions, while outside standard protocol, directly resulted in preventing Operation Kronos. We have the facility secured, the data drives, and confirmation of Phoenix Protocol assets." The agency representative spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly soft, though edged with steel. "Phoenix Protocol. This confirms certain historical concerns. How certain are we of the scale? The data is being processed, but initial findings on T-asset roster suggest dozens. Thorn was Epsilon 7. What does that imply about Alpha through Delta?" Ingrid took a breath, focusing on the facts. "The data drives contain Volkov's operational parameters. They confirm the conditioning methods, the activation triggers, the Kronos target, a major cyber conference. The asset roster lists over 50 individuals by codename. The biological markers Anya identified are consistent across the few individuals secured at the site. They are dormant, or perhaps offline now that the broadcast was neutralized, but their state is irreversible, from preliminary medical assessments." Anya chimed in from the screen. "Analysis of tissue samples from the recovered assets confirms the synthesized compounds are deeply integrated into neural pathways. The conditioning appears permanent. Even if consciousness returns, the overlaid command structures seem to have fundamentally altered their cognitive function. They are shells, unable to function normally. The biological clock in Thorn's tissues suggests the process kept him in a form of suspended animation for 8 years, aging minimally, until his recent activation state." She paused, a somber look on her face. As for Elias Thorn specifically, the medical report confirms he passed away shortly after being recovered. The shock of the sudden loss of the active control signal, combined with physical trauma from the confrontation, his system couldn't cope. A wave of profound sadness washed over Ingrid. Thorn, the paradox that started everything, reduced to a programmed weapon, a ghost from the past brought back only to die again, truly this time. Permanent damage indeed, a shell, then extinguished. "And the individual you referred to as Nightingale?" The Internal Affairs representative pressed, turning to Ingrid. "This source provided critical information. Their identity?" Ingrid met his gaze steadily. "The channel was untraceable. The messages were cryptic, historical references mostly. I can't provide an identity. She wouldn't betray the source who had risked everything to help. Let them assume it was another intelligence ghost, a rumor." Moreau stepped in again. "We are still investigating all facets of this operation. The priority was stopping Kronos, which they accomplished. The political ramifications are significant. We are dealing with potential blowback from multiple agencies and governments who may have had historical links to Project Phoenix, or simply wish to control the narrative surrounding its reemergence." The agency representative nodded, understanding. "The official line will be managed. A rogue operation, unaffiliated. The assets, a medical anomaly perhaps. The building collapses, structural failures confirmed by follow-up investigation. The truth would be buried under layers of plausible deniability and political convenience." Ingrid felt a familiar frustration, but also a grudging acceptance. This was the labyrinth. Some truths were too dangerous for the light. And Volkov? Internal Affairs asked. At large, Moreau confirmed, his expression grim. A dangerous fugitive. We have active warrants, but he disappeared without a trace from the facility. He's likely gone deep underground. He designed the labyrinth. He knows how to hide in it. The debriefing wound down, a sterile exchange of facts filtered through the lens of political necessity. Ingrid and Kovacs were cleared, officially commended for preventing Kronos, but cautioned about procedure. The Phoenix was exposed, its immediate 3T averted, but its architect and the chilling possibility of its evolution remained. Back in her sterile office at Europol headquarters in The Hague, the familiar data streams scrolling across her screens felt distant, almost alien. The past few weeks had been a seismic shift, ripping her from the controlled world of historical analysis into the raw, brutal reality of active operations. The physical aches were fading, replaced by a persistent exhaustion and the phantom weight of the data drive she and Kovacs had carried out. Kovacs was back in Budapest, handling the local complexities of the aftermath, dealing with the media spin and the arrival of national authorities at the sanctuary site, now officially designated a site of significant historical and security interest. They spoke daily, their bond forged in shared danger, now translating into a comfortable, pragmatic camaraderie. He understood the grounding work of securing the ashes. Anya came into her office, a stack of printouts in her hands, her usual bright energy tempered by the gravity of the subject. She sat down, spreading the documents on Ingrid's desk, preliminary reports on the recovered assets. It's grim, Ingrid, Anya said softly. We're trying everything, medical teams, neurological experts, but the conditioning, it's not just psychological, it's a physical restructuring of the neural pathways at a microscopic level, facilitated by the compound DS. We can't deprogram it. At best, we might be able to mitigate some symptoms, keep them stable. But they won't be the people they were. They're permanent casualties. She gestured to a specific report. Thorne's case confirms it. The sudden shock was too much for a system conditioned to such precise, controlled inputs for so long. Ingrid looked at the photo of Elias Thorne in the report, a face she had only ever seen as a paradox, a body out of time, a weapon in a uniform. Now, he was simply a victim, his tragic journey from MIA to conditioned asset to second death, a testament to Volkov's cruelty and the Phoenix's reach. Ashes, she murmured. Just ashes. Anya nodded. And Volkov? Gone, Ingrid confirmed, turning to her monitor, pulling up the still empty fugitive profile. He's good, decades in the shadows preparing. He knows how to vanish. But we have the data, Anya said, tapping the stack of reports. Everything. The compounds, the activation frequencies, the asset list. We can begin to understand the full scope. Identify potential dormant assets still out there. Develop countermeasures. Ingrid looked out the window, not at the familiar cityscape of The Hague, but at a distant, undefined point on the horizon. She thought of her old life, the sterile precision of her analysis, the comfort of historical facts. It felt like a lifetime ago. She had sought patterns in data, found ghosts in archives, and ended up facing them in the flesh, fighting for her life against a resurrected past. She had started as a detached observer, analyzing from a safe distance. She had become a participant, dirtying her hands in the grim reality of the labyrinth. The trauma was real, the fear had been visceral, the confrontation with Volkov and the sight of the programmed assets chilling to the bone. But something else had solidified within her, a resolve. It's not over, Ingrid said, the words quiet but firm. It wasn't just about processing the data or writing the final reports. It was about the future. Volkov was out there. The idea of Phoenix, the weaponization of human history and potential, was now a sea-infirmed reality. Anya looked at her, seeing the change. No, she agreed. It's not. Ingrid turned back to her screens, but her gaze wasn't just on the historical archives anymore. It was on the blank space where Volkov's location should be, on the uncertain fate of potentially dozens of other dormant assets, on the shadow that the Phoenix still cast. Her role had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just an analyst of dead operatives. She was an active part of the ongoing fight against those who would resurrect the ghosts of the past. The ashes were behind her, a grim reminder of what had been. But the horizon, stretching out into the unknown, was where the true work lay. Volkov was still out there, and she knew, with chilling certainty, that their paths were destined to cross again. The labyrinth had dragged her in, and now she was a permanent inhabitant, ready for the next chapter.
If you enjoyed this audiobook, a like and subscription to Soundscape Books would mean a lot.